Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Taggart. Autumn Taggart, a single mother, lived in Windsor, a city near the Michigan-Ontario border, with her 9-year-old son Gavin in 2018. Despite her breakup with Gavin's father, Chris Sherwin, they remained on good terms to minimize the impact on their child. On Saturday, June 9, 2018, Autumn and Gavin spent the afternoon with Chris, and after grocery shopping together, he dropped them off at their third-floor apartment. After Chris left, Gavin played video games with his mother before bedtime, unaware of the horrifying night that was about to unfold. Gavin woke up to a noise while it was still dark outside. Startled, he opened his eyes to see a strange man standing close to his bed. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before leaving the room. Gavin knew his mother's room was located behind the wall to the right, as shown in the photo. About a minute later, he heard his mother scream. The boy had never felt such intense fear before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the space. After a few minutes, Gavin fell asleep, overcome with exhaustion. Gavin woke up to find it was already morning. He got out of bed and went straight to his mother's room. He was met with a scene of utter destruction. Everything was smashed and broken. His mother, Autumn, was lying on the bed, but she wasn't asleep. At first, 9-year-old Gavin thought she was just resting, but the blood on her nose told a different story. The reality hit him like a ton of bricks. His mother was dead. Gavin was in denial, refusing to accept the truth. To distract himself from the grim reality, he spent the morning playing video games on his console and watching YouTube videos, trying to avoid the unpleasant fact that his deceased mother was lying in the next room. In the afternoon, Gavin couldn't take the pressure anymore and broke down in tears. He decided to confide in someone, so he went to his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father on Messenger. He typed out a desperate message. Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris and his girlfriend quickly got in their car and drove to Gavin and Autumn's home. When they arrived, Chris parked the car and got out, spotting his son standing behind a sliding glass door on the third floor. However, Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, so Gavin came downstairs to let him in. Chris asked his son to wait with his girlfriend while he went to investigate why Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris entered the apartment, proceeded to the bedroom, and was shocked to see Autumn's pale appearance. Her face and body were bruised, and her nose was bloody. He immediately dialed 911. The police and an ambulance arrived at the address he provided, where the paramedics examined Autumn's body and surveyed the signs of struggle in the bedroom. Given the extent of her injuries and the evidence of a fierce fight, they sadly had no option but to pronounce her dead, concluding that it was no accident. Investigators searched the apartment for clues, while a specialist in child interrogation spoke with Gavin, who revealed that an overnight guest had instructed him to go to bed. Gavin recounted hearing his mother's screams, but they abruptly ceased. He provided a description of the man he saw in his room that night, saying he appeared to be a white male of average height with messy hair, resembling someone who had just rolled out of bed. According to Gavin, the man was skinny, but not too skinny. The autopsy concluded that Autumn's death was the result of strangulation. Furthermore, it was discovered that she had been physically assaulted prior to her death, with injuries found in her genital area. Additionally, male DNA samples were recovered from her body. The investigation aimed to address several key questions, including how the perpetrator gained access to the apartment, what motivated the crime, and most crucially, the identity of the individual who had entry to the building, as an electronic key was required for entry. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that the killer was one of the building's residents, since Gavin was familiar with all his neighbors and the man he spotted on the night of the murder was not among them. To commit the crime, the perpetrator would have needed not only an electronic key to access the building, but also a way to enter Autumn's apartment, which presented a problem. There were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment, suggesting that either she had let the perpetrator in voluntarily or had failed to lock the door. Eventually, the police abandoned their initial assumptions when they discovered evidence that the perpetrator had accessed the third floor. It emerged that the individual had first climbed up to the second-floor balcony and then made their way to the third floor, where they found the door was already open, allowing them to enter the apartment unimpeded. In addition to the DNA sample, the police also found fingerprints at the scene, which they were working to match to their owner. It wasn't until 12 days after the body was discovered that the police finally released the victim's identity, in the hope that this would lead to new tips from the public. The authorities are seeking anyone with information that could aid the investigation to come forward and contact the detectives. A witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot adjacent to the building on the night of the crime. The vehicle was seen in the lot until around 6 a.m. Detectives believe the SUV's owner may have been involved in Autumn's death and hypothesized that the individual used the roof of their car as a stepping stone to climb higher. Specifically, they think the perpetrator exploited the building's decorative protrusions, which resemble steps, to ascend from the second floor to the third. The nighttime crime scene presented an advantage to investigators as most people are asleep then, resulting in fewer mobile phones being active. By analyzing phone activity in Autumn's area, they were able to narrow down the list of active numbers near the crime scene. During the investigation, detectives found that one of the phone numbers belonged to a neighbor of Autumn's, who lived in the same building. Although the neighbor claimed to know nothing about the incident during her police interview, her alibi didn't quite add up. Phone records showed that she had made calls from her apartment and various locations around the city, and her phone was switched off around the time Autumn's life was taken. While it was difficult to pinpoint her exact location due to the margin of error in phone tracking, it was clear that she was being evasive and hiding something from the detectives. So they went to speak with Michelle again. She reiterated that she didn't know anything and hadn't heard anything, but the police subtly warned her that if it was later discovered she had withheld vital information from the investigation, she could be considered an accomplice to the crime. As a result, she began to talk. Michelle said that around 2 a.m. that night, a man known to them as Jay got in touch with her and her boyfriend. Jay was looking to buy illegal drugs and also wanted to hire an escort. The three of them drove to an ATM where Jay withdrew some cash. After that, Michelle and her boyfriend handed over a certain amount of the drug to Jay. Michelle admitted that she and her boyfriend were drug dealers. Later, Jay asked them to sell him more drugs. According to Michelle, she then told Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building. Michelle confessed that she and her boyfriend had planned to rob Jay. Upon arrival at the building, the three individuals ingested illicit drugs. Following this, Michelle and her boyfriend resolved to abscond with the remaining drugs. Prior to their escape, Michelle concealed a bag of the drugs within her genital area. According to Michelle, she and her boyfriend escaped, stealing not just the substance, but also a significant amount of Jay's money. They fled to the building's entrance, then went up to the apartment, where they barricaded themselves inside, sitting silently in the dark. Jay was unable to enter the building since he lacked an electronic key, and he couldn't yell or honk his horn, fearing that someone might alert the police. According to Michelle, when they looked out the window, they noticed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. Additionally, a man was seen driving away at approximately 6 a.m. Investigators theorized that Jay must have climbed into the building, attempting to track down those responsible for stealing the substance and money from him. However, as he was unaware of Michelle's residence, it's likely that he inadvertently entered Autumn's apartment by mistake. The police obtained the suspect's phone number and photo from a camera at the bank entrance, where he withdrew cash to buy the substance, and from an ATM camera. Investigators learned that the man's real name was Gesh Bogle, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who lived and worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He was also the owner of a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently crossed the river by bridge or tunnel to visit Canada, specifically Windsor, almost daily. Authorities tracked the suspect's movements, discovering he had left Canada on June 10th, the morning Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. Following the police release of information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Gesh sold his car. Canadian police collaborated with their American counterparts, learning Gesh planned to relocate from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents resided in Kent. The combination of his decision to move, disposing of the car, and ceasing visits to Canada raised strong suspicions, but the police required concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency in their investigation and asked them to closely monitor the suspect's activities. DNA evidence found on Autumn's body suggested it belonged to Gesh, but to confirm this, they needed to obtain a DNA sample from him for comparison. U.S. agents tracked the suspect's every move, aware that he was planning to relocate to Washington State and fearing he might flee to another country. In an effort to alter his appearance, Gesh shaved his beard and started wearing blue contact lenses. Fortunately for the investigators, Gesh was reckless. One day, he visited a bar in Warren, where he spent several hours drinking. When he downed his last glass and exited the bar, the agents swiftly seized the glass, thereby obtaining a DNA sample from it. Although it took some time to compare this new sample with the one found on Autumn's body, the outcome was not unexpected. The male DNA discovered on the victim's body was identified as a match to Gesh Bogle's DNA. On August 17, 2018, nearly 2.5 months following Autumn Taggart's tragic demise, Gesh was taken into custody at his parents' residence in Kent, Washington, a development that caught him off guard, as he appeared to believe the authorities would be unable to locate him. The U.S. authorities promptly initiated the extradition process to have him returned to his native country. In the supporting extradition documents, the prosecutor underscored Gesh's perceived threats to public safety, his high risk of fleeing, and his unpredictable nature. Soon after, Canadian authorities charged him with the murder of Autumn Taggart. Due to pandemic-related restrictions, the trial was delayed for an extended period. However, it finally began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the proceedings took place in 3 separate courtrooms: the main courtroom, where the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant with his defense team were seated, and 2 additional courtrooms equipped with large screens broadcasting the trial to Autumn's family members and other observers. Gesh Bogle denied committing first-degree deprivation of life, claiming he unintentionally killed Autumn. He explained that earlier, some thieves stole money and drugs from his car, leaving him upset. After consuming a large amount of alcohol and substances, he got out of the vehicle to search for the thieves. Due to his intoxication, he didn't recall many events from that night. However, he remembered climbing onto the balcony and entering the apartment where Autumn was sleeping, mistakenly thinking she was Michelle, the woman who had robbed him. When Autumn awoke and started screaming, he ordered her to be quiet, but she disobeyed. In response, he covered her mouth, which led to her suffocation. Only after the screaming stopped did Gesh realize he had accidentally taken Autumn's life, and he attempted to perform CPR on her, but it was too late. Gesh had no memory of how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers requested that the first-degree life imprisonment charges be dropped, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed Gesh was unaware of his actions due to the large quantity of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over Autumn's mouth suggests he wanted her to be quiet, not dead. According to defense lawyer Peter Thorning, Gesh lacked the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. Thorning claimed that intoxication was the sole explanation for Jitesh's behavior, and that sometimes tragic events occur without intending the outcome. He stated that Autumn's death was not intentional, and that Jitesh was either too intoxicated to realize his actions could cause death or did not appreciate the consequences. Jitesh's lawyers argued that there was no evidence to suggest the defendant had sexual intercourse with the victim. Although Jitesh's DNA was found on Autumn's body, it was not seminal fluid, according to the lawyers. They suggested that the DNA could have been transferred through cross-contamination, where DNA is accidentally transferred from one surface to another, possibly through the forensic expert's gloves. The defense team attempted to convince the jury that John Lort, a forensic expert involved in the investigation, had botched his job and inadvertently transferred Jitesh's DNA to Autumn Taggart's body. As part of his role, Lort was responsible for photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence that came into direct contact with the victim. Jitesh's defense lawyer, Peter Thorning, questioned Lort about the possibility of DNA or fluid transfer from the body to the bed sheet or vice versa during the manipulation of the body, which is a known phenomenon referred to as cross-contamination. Lort stated during cross-examination that he changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and using his camera to take photographs, thus preventing cross-contamination. In his examination of evidence in Taggart's room, Lort searched for bodily fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as he explained that in cases involving a deceased female victim, the likelihood of sexual assault is higher compared to cases involving a male victim. Lort testified to the court that he did not find any fluid evidence consistent with sexual assault. He acknowledged that his examination of the body was limited, as he was not a trained medical professional, such as a coroner. Lort testified that there were no obvious signs of a struggle at Autumn's apartment, such as broken furniture or glass, forced entry, tampered locks, or blood spatter. In contrast, the prosecutor believed that the defendant's actions constituted a search for hidden substances, similar to how Michelle had hidden them in her genital area. The prosecutor argued that the defendant committed sexual assault by searching Autumn's body in the same way, regardless of whether he used his hand. When questioned by the prosecutor about why he didn't call 911 when Autumn stopped breathing, Jitesh disagreed, saying he didn't think it was necessary. Jitesh responded that he feared the police would arrest him because he knew nobody would take his word for it. He could hardly believe his own story, as he recounted in his testimony. Jitesh acknowledged that his memory of the events in Autumn's room was hazy. However, he did recall performing CPR on Autumn after she had stopped screaming. Previously, he had testified that he remembered counting 5 or 6 ribs down before starting CPR, and that he had done 15 compressions accompanied by 3 breaths. The prosecutor also challenged the defendant's claim that the strangulation of the victim was accidental. He pointed out that if the defendant simply wanted to silence Autumn, he could have covered her mouth with his hand. Instead, he also pinched her nose shut, which deliberately prevented her from breathing. Moreover, he sustained this grip for a period of time, indicating that he was fully aware of his actions. Chris Sherwin, Autumn Taggart's former partner and the father of their son, was the last person to hear from her via text message around 12:30 a.m. on June 10th. After sending a follow-up text and receiving no response, he grew concerned. It wasn't until later that day that he received a text from Autumn's phone, only to discover it was their son responding. The court displayed a copy of these text messages for the jury to review on December 1st, 2021. Following deliberation, the 12-person jury found Gesh Bogle guilty of depriving Autumn of her life. Despite allegations, they found no convincing evidence that Jitesh had engaged in sexual intercourse with Autumn. Autumn's father, John Taggart, expressed relief and gratitude for the verdict, stating, "Can't say we weren't nervous, but it's definitely the right verdict. Autumn deserved this. Her son deserved this. Justice. That's what we wanted. That's what we got." The family members were visibly relieved, hugging each other in celebration. On January 5, 2022, the court sentenced Gesh Bogle to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before he is eligible for parole. Gesh appeared in court via video from jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit and a black mask. During the victim impact statements, he sat quietly against the wall, distant from the camera. When given the opportunity to speak, he expressed remorse, saying, "It's hard to express the sorrow and remorse I feel. I am happy for the family that they have a sense of justice, and they can move on. Part of my soul died that day as well." Autumn's father, John Taggart, reiterated his desire for Canadian laws to change, stating, "We'd still like to see the laws in Canada change for life sentences to actual life, not 25 years and then parole. We'd like life to mean life for all victims." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in the small Swedish town of Jo, where she had a peaceful upbringing with her parents and older sister. Known for her kindness, positivity, and determination, Lisa decided early on that she wanted to study architecture in Australia. Growing up, she traveled extensively with her family, visiting many countries around the world. As an independent young woman, Lisa worked various part-time jobs since her teenage years to earn her own money. Before the summer of 2015, 17-year-old Lisa secured her first serious job at a cafe located approximately a 40-minute drive from her home. Initially, her parents drove her to work, but after a few weeks, her father decided to purchase a scooter for her. However, during the first few weeks, her father followed her in his scooter to ensure her safety, given her limited experience driving on the roads. As Lisa only worked on weekends, her father accompanied her every morning and evening during this period. This went on until June 7th, when he finally let her drive to the cafe alone. Somewhere around lunchtime, her parents decided to visit her at work and have lunch together that day. The cafe was pretty crowded, so Lisa was really busy with work. She took a short break for lunch, had a snack with her parents, and they went back home. At 6:23 p.m., Lisa sent a text message to her father informing him that she was leaving work. However, just 3 minutes later, her father received a call from her. When he answered the phone, there was no response from the other end. Instead, he could hear some indistinct voices in the background, leading him to believe that Lisa had accidentally dialed his number. He assumed she was engaged in a conversation with her colleagues. Additionally, he heard the sound of a scooter door being closed forcefully. He repeatedly called out Lisa's name, but there was still no answer. Eventually, he ended the call and began waiting for Lisa to arrive home. However, she never showed up. An hour passed, and Lisa's parents started to worry. She should have arrived by now, so her father immediately thought something might have happened to her on the way. It was her first time riding alone on the scooter, and he was deeply concerned about her safety. He tried calling her several times, but Lisa's phone was off. After waiting a few more minutes, her father decided to hit the road, hoping to meet her along the way since Lisa should have taken the shortest route. The father, concerned that Lisa might have met with an accident, drove slowly, meticulously examining the road, but couldn't find her anywhere. He reached the cafe without any success in locating his daughter. As he arrived at her workplace, he noticed Lisa's scooter parked in front of the building. By this point, the man was already panic-stricken, having failed to find her along the entire route. The sight of her scooter provided immediate relief, making him think that she might have been held up at work for some reason. However, the cafe was empty, and he noticed something unusual. Lisa's scooter keys were still in the ignition, with her helmet hanging from the handle. This observation led him to suspect that something unfortunate might have happened to his daughter, as she would never carelessly leave the keys in the scooter and abandon it unattended in the parking lot. Meanwhile, Lisa's mother called the cafe owner in hopes of shedding light on her daughter's whereabouts, but the woman claimed to have no idea where she could have gone. She had called her employees around 6 p.m., and they said they were closing the cafe. After the call from Lisa's mother, the cafe owner immediately got into her scooter and headed there. On the way, she called 4 of her friends who lived nearby and asked them to help with the search. When the cafe owner arrived at the scene, they, along with Lisa's father, began searching both the establishment itself and the surrounding area. Their last hope was that Lisa, for some reason, might have decided to take a bus instead of the scooter. They checked the schedule, and her mother, along with Lisa's older sister, drove to the bus stop in their town. Unfortunately, this version was not confirmed. Lisa was not on the bus, so her relatives immediately contacted the police by that time. It was almost 1 p.m. and it had already gotten dark outside. The police immediately launched extensive searches. The fact that Lisa's scooter was left in the parking lot with the keys led them to consider the possibility of abduction. Cases like this are quite rare in Sweden, especially in the remote provincial area where Lisa's town was located. Therefore, the police immediately dispatched several groups with search dogs, while other officers began knocking on every house located near the cafe. When Lisa's classmates and her friends learned about her disappearance, they began spreading information about it on social media, hoping to attract more attention and possibly find some witnesses. The search continued all night, but it yielded no results. On Monday morning, the police publicly announced Lisa's disappearance and urged anyone with useful information to come forward. Around the same time, a man working in a barn directly opposite the cafe discovered a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. The investigators had already inspected this barn on the evening of Lisa's disappearance, but had not noticed the glove there. They showed it to Lisa's parents, who confirmed that the glove did indeed belong to their daughter. This further substantiated the abduction theory, and the police deployed additional resources for the search. By then, news of Lisa's disappearance had spread nationwide, and hundreds of volunteers had joined the search effort. On Tuesday, the police received several more disturbing clues. Volunteers searched the area along a dirt road located a short distance from the cafe. There, they discovered a phone case, a receipt, a ticket, and a shattered smartphone screen. Investigators quickly determined that all of these items belonged to Lisa and concentrated their search in that vicinity. Soon after, they found additional pieces of the broken smartphone, Lisa's identification, and more receipts. All of these items were dispersed along the same dirt road. After the discovery of evidence, the police were almost certain that Lisa had been abducted. They put everything into the search, and more people joined with each passing day. The case became the biggest news in Sweden, and hundreds of volunteers poured in from all over the country. A local organization specializing in finding missing persons also joined in. The search effort for Lisa became the largest in the country's modern history, with over 1,000 participants in total. The police also received numerous calls with leads. One woman reported that she went out for a run the day before Lisa's disappearance. At one point, a man standing next to his scooter stopped her in the middle of the road. He spoke to her in English and asked for directions to a city she had never heard of. She tried to show him the way on Google Maps, but the man asked her to get in his scooter and show him the route on his navigator. The woman found this request quite suspicious, so she refused and continued running. She also shared an interesting detail with the police. The woman believed she had seen this man among the workers who were repairing the same barn located across the road from the cafe. Lisa's colleagues also shared one observation. On the day of her disappearance, one of the witnesses noticed 2 men standing across the road from the cafe, looking towards the establishment. She didn't think much of it at the time, but after Lisa's disappearance, she decided to share this fact with the police. The next morning on Wednesday, Lisa's father, along with some friends, went to search the dirt road where her belongings were found. Walking a bit further, he made several more alarming discoveries. He found Lisa's driver's license and her house keys. It all seemed as if Lisa was being taken along this road away from the cafe, while the abductor was throwing her belongings out of their scooter or other vehicle they used to kidnap her. The police and volunteers concentrated all their efforts on this area, but no other items were found. That same evening, a friend of Lisa's father was returning home from the search. Passing by the cafe, he noticed that the police tape had been removed from the barn where Lisa's glove was found. The man decided to go inside and look for any other clues once more. He grabbed a flashlight from his scooter, as it was already getting dark outside, and walked around the premises for several minutes until something shiny on the floor caught his attention. When he looked closer, he saw a woman's earring and another one just like it nearby. The man reported this to the police, who showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. They confirmed that the earrings belonged to their daughter. The police once again sealed off the barn and searched it more thoroughly. The lead detective later explained that on the first day of Lisa's search, their main focus was on finding the girl herself, so the barn was not inspected as thoroughly. They might have missed such small items as earrings, but now they brought in numerous forensic experts along with search dogs. This time, they spotted an odd clue behind a wall: human poop. Forensic experts say when crooks do terrible crimes, their body makes lots of adrenaline, sometimes making them need to go real bad. Like killers often wet themselves before or during the murder. Since Lisa's stuff was in the barn, cops think the perp might have took her there. So, they reckon this person, all hopped up on adrenaline, and couldn't hold it. The poop got sent off for DNA testing. On Friday, the search area was expanded and volunteers reached a farm about 3 kilometers from the cafe. It was a facility with several large buildings where many people worked. The search team decided to inspect all the buildings. Shortly after arriving, 2 English-speaking men showed up. One claimed that the police had already searched the farm, but the team leader doubted this and continued the search. The men observed the volunteers for a while before driving away. The other day, the search team found a pile of wood behind the cowshed. Underneath, they found a helmet, a coat, and a motorcycle headset. The police arrived on site and confirmed that all these items belonged to Lisa. They sent police experts to conduct a more extensive search of the farm. Detectives also heard stories about 2 strange men who had tried to discourage volunteers from inspecting the farm. The police also recalled the story of a woman who had met a suspicious man while she was jogging. Meanwhile, forensic experts arrived at the farm together with the volunteers. They continued to inspect this area, and soon their attention was drawn to an old trailer. It was surrounded by tall grass and looked as if it hadn't been used in many years. But next to its door, the grass was flattened as if something had been lying there recently. Some of the grass was also trapped under the door, indicating that it had been recently opened. As soon as the forensic experts opened the door, they were immediately met with a strong smell of decay. Inside the trailer, there were many lockers for clothing. Apparently, it was once used as a changing room for workers. All the lockers except one were locked, leading the experts to suspect that Lisa's body might be in one of them. They began opening each locker and eventually saw that Lisa's body was actually in one that was left open, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small size of the locker, the perpetrator managed to fit their victim inside. Lisa had a rope around her neck and a large amount of tape over her head. Her pants were pulled down and her shirt was pulled up. Medical experts determined that Lisa died from strangulation. However, they found no signs of sexual assault. All of her clothing was handed over to the lab, while news of the discovery of her body rapidly spread throughout the country. All this time, the news of Lisa's abduction dominated headlines in Sweden. When her body was found and the public learned of Lisa's brutal murder, the case shook the entire country. Such crimes were extremely rare in Sweden, and people were shocked that someone could commit such a heinous act. The Lisa body been discover, something way day eerie happen. YouTube users come see one video we dem post 13 days before the murder. The video name na 13, and he get countdown timer. The name of the channel we post them sef they worry people, them call him Lisa home. News of the video spread well, people come they surprised. Some people talk say somebody don't predict the murder, but no be so. Now just be like, say, person changed the channel name and video title after them find Lisa body. Maybe the person just wants start a notatory or they play wicked prank. Meanwhile, the police were doing everything in their power to find the killer as quickly as possible. At the time of Lisa's discovery, investigators had already brought in 2 brothers and a woman, and they all denied any involvement in the murder. They claimed that at the time of the abduction, they were at home, providing alibis for each other. According to their accounts, the older brother, Naris, was asleep in his room while his wife was preparing dinner, and the younger brother was on the computer. Naris also added that around 8 p.m. he woke up and went to the gas station, where he bought pizza and cigarettes. The police were pretty skeptical of their alibis, as all 3 could have simply been covering for each other. They collected their DNA samples, but investigators still lacked any evidence directly linking any of them to the murder. However, this didn't last long. Forensic experts were working in the barn and on the farm, using all their resources and manpower, and their efforts soon paid off. In the barn, there was a small office-like room with a large window overlooking the cafe. While examining this room, experts found 15 traces of semen from men on the walls near the window and on the floor. It seemed as if someone had stood there, watched the cafe staff, including Lisa, and pleasured himself. The semen samples were immediately sent to the laboratory, and experts quickly extracted DNA profiles from them. All 15 semen traces matched the DNA of 35-year-old brother Naris. The same was true for the feces found in the barn. They also belonged to him. In the next room, which had previously been used for storing cow's milk, forensic experts noticed a pipe about 2 feet above the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust except for a small strip. The size of this strip perfectly matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Traces of blood were also found on this pipe, and the DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Naris. On the floor beneath the pipe, they discovered a piece of the same rope. Experts examined it and identified 2 DNA profiles, Lisa's and Naris's. This was a significant breakthrough for the police. It finally linked the man to the rope used to kill the victim. Furthermore, a hair belonging to Lisa was found on the floor of this room. Another crucial piece of evidence came from her jacket. DNA traces belonging to Naris were also found on it. Based on this evidence, the police believed that she was killed right there. They pieced together an approximate sequence of events. Naris had been observing the cafe for some time, and when Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her. Based on the jogger's account, he could have asked Lisa for directions to a certain city or used some other tactics. Then, Naris might have asked her to get into his scooter to enter the route into the GPS system. Considering Lisa was kind-hearted and always tried to help others, she might have agreed. Once she was in the scooter, the perpetrator taped her mouth shut and drove her to the barn. There, he wrapped the rope around her neck and hung her from the pipe. According to the medical experts, this sight likely excited him so much that he defecated on the floor due to an adrenaline rush. When she died, he placed Lisa's body in the scooter and drove to the farm, tossing her belongings out the window along the way. There, he hid the body in the trailer locker, covering it with old clothes scattered around. All of this, from the moment of the abduction, took the perpetrator less than an hour. Despite all the evidence, Naris continued to insist on his innocence. His wife and younger brother had to be released because there was nothing against them. Once free, they almost immediately left Sweden and returned to their homeland, Lithuania. The preparation for the trial was intense. Naris just claimed he had worked in that barn for a long time, suggesting his DNA could have been present there due to his job. Additionally, he had an alibi provided by his wife and brother, although there were serious doubts about the credibility of both sources. In court, this could have definitely worked in his favor. On the other hand, the presence of Naris's DNA on the victim's clothing could only be explained by direct contact with her on the day of the murder. The police also found a witness who saw his scooter near the cafe shortly before and after Lisa's abduction. According to them, the scooter passed along the road between the cafe and the farm, several times at the same time when Naris was supposed to be sleeping at home, according to his brother and wife. For several months after the discovery of her body, experts continued to examine all the available evidence using the most advanced equipment. Eventually, they uncovered traces of Naris's DNA on almost all of Lisa's clothing, including the inside of her underwear. Considering that the whole country was still following the case, investigators continued to search for any other useful clues that could impact the legal process and further prove Naris's involvement. They even went to Lithuania to speak with his wife and brother once again. The woman continued to insist that he did not leave the house between 6 and 8 p.m. But when it was the younger brother's turn, detectives suddenly got what they wanted. After telling him about all the evidence against his brother and detailing what he did with the 17-year-old girl, the man decided to tell them everything. He claimed that Naris actually was not at home that evening and only returned around 7:30 p.m. He was covered in dirt and immediately threw all his clothes into the washing machine. When the police started to question all the residents and reached their house, Naris whispered to his brother, "Tell them I was home at that time." Later, Naris explained that he was afraid he would be framed for a crime he didn't commit because he was an immigrant and had no alibi for the time of the abduction. The younger brother truly believed that his relative had nothing to do with it, but after hearing about all the evidence, he realized it wasn't the case. Lisa's funeral took place only a month after her murder. The church where it was held could only accommodate 130 people, but there were many more who came to say goodbye to her. Organizers even decided to set up benches and large screens outside so that everyone could watch the ceremony. The trial began 4 months after the murder. This case once again captured the attention of the entire country, so everyone involved in the process was under tremendous pressure. None of them had the right to make a mistake. Naris's lawyer insisted that his client's DNA could have ended up on the victim's clothing because he had worked in the barn. The prosecution, however, pointed out that this version made no sense, especially in the case of Lisa's underwear. The only way the suspect's DNA could have ended up there was if he touched the victim's underwear. The lawyer couldn't provide any other solid facts pointing to his client's innocence. At one point, he tried to push the version that the real murderer was Naris's younger brother. According to this theory, the brother somehow took multiple samples of Naris's DNA and placed them on the victim's body as well as at the crime scene. However, the lawyer failed to explain the possibility of such manipulations with the DNA. The trial lasted for a month, and Naris was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security prison. Given that this is Sweden we're talking about, the facility resembled more of a decent 3-star hotel. His lawyer attempted to appeal the verdict. In early 2017, Naris himself applied for deportation and was transferred to a prison in his homeland, although Lithuanian prisons are significantly worse than Swedish ones. The reasons for this decision were unknown at the time. The court decided to approve his request, despite the fact that providing comfortable conditions of detention cost Swedish taxpayers several hundred per day for each individual inmate. Later that same year, his motives became clear when he appealed to a Lithuanian court, and his sentence was reduced from life to 15 years. However, the joy was short-lived for the murderer, as a few weeks later, the court overturned its decision, and Naris was once again destined to spend his entire life in prison. Only now he had no chance of returning to the comfortable Swedish cell. 5 years later, in August 2022, Naris faced yet another downside of being transferred to a Lithuanian prison. While inmates were being moved to another block, one of them attacked Naris with a shank. He suffered serious injuries and died on the way to the hospital. As for his wife, the question of her involvement is still not entirely ruled out. Police noted that there is practically no chance of her direct involvement in the abduction or murder, as experts would have found her DNA on Lisa's clothing or belongings. However, it cannot be ruled out that she knew of her husband's crime and helped him evade justice by providing a false alibi. Naris's younger brother also raises questions. Cafe employees reported seeing two men standing near the barn and watching them. Considering that one of them was likely Naris himself, the second should have been his brother. However, the man's DNA was not found either in the barn itself or on Lisa's clothing, making his involvement in the murder unlikely. Perhaps they were indeed observing the young employees with the older brother and even discussing inappropriate things, but only Naris decided to commit such a heinous crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of West family. The West family appeared to everyone as a strong, happy, and well-off unit. The couple had been married for 14.5 years, raising a daughter together. They never gave anyone reason to suspect any difficulties in their marriage. That was until the early morning of January 13, 2018, when 42-year-old Mrs. West was found deceased near her own home. To understand why, we need to delve into the West family's history from the beginning and unravel the rumors about the late housewife's double life that had been circulating for years. Kat Dawn West, née Martin, was born on February 15, 1975, in the quaint town of Davie, Florida, the only child of Nancy and John Jonathan Martin. She grew up in a modest family environment. As a child, she yearned for a younger sibling, a dream unfulfilled due to her mother's health issues. Perhaps this is why Kat was overly attached to dolls. She treated them like living beings, singing to them and cradling them. In school, Kat was known for her beauty and sociability, actively participating in sports and dance. During her teenage years, signs of bipolar affective disorder began to show. This included days of depression and anxiety, alternating with periods when she felt overly happy and restless. Unfortunately, her parents didn't notice her condition right away. By then, Kat had started drinking to manage her emotions. It wasn't until she sought for alcoholism that the cause of her issues was identified. In her 20s, Kat managed to overcome alcohol dependency. Dealing with bipolar disorder, however, proved more challenging. She needed several strong medications that led to complex drug interactions and side effects. Eventually, they got the disorder under control, but she had to stay on medication until her untimely death. Kat longed for marriage, a family, and children, but her personal life had many difficulties, likely because of her mental health and alcohol problems. Despite this, the attractive blonde had numerous admirers and was often the life of the party. In her youth, Kat wanted to be a model. She went to castings and tried different looks. She was fascinated with Marilyn Monroe from the 1950s. Kat watched Monroe's movies on repeat, collected posters, and imitated her style and image. She even looked a bit like Marilyn, something she was proud of. Though Kat's dream of becoming a famous model didn't come true, her photos often appeared in local magazines. This gave her some recognition and occasionally made people recognize her in her hometown streets. At 28 years old, she finally met William West, the man she'd start a family with. William Jeffrey West, who mostly went by his middle name, was born in 1970 in Alabama into an ordinary family. From an early age, he dreamed of a career in the military or law enforcement. He was a diligent student and active sports enthusiast, robustly fit and incredibly focused. In the early 1990s, William joined the U.S. military, serving initially as a military police officer. William's commitment and dedication led him to become a military recruiter, responsible for enlisting individuals into the Army and Navy. Over time, he rose to head a recruitment division. In total, William devoted 2 decades to military service. Alongside his military career, William pursued higher education. He earned a bachelor's degree in public from the University of Carolina and continued his studies in criminal justice and disaster and emergency management, eventually earning a master's degree. William was intelligent, composed, and goal-oriented, yet modest and somewhat introverted. He preferred quiet gatherings over loud parties and generally shunned the spotlight. He married young and had 2 children, known for being a devoted family man and responsible parent. Upon retiring from the military, William became a corporal in the police department of a university town. He was entrusted with ensuring the safety of the campus community, approaching his duties with seriousness and responsibility. Although he was issued a service firearm, he never had to use it throughout his career. Kat and Jeffrey were an unusual but happy couple. Their paths crossed in the mid-2000s when Jeffrey was still serving in the military and married to his first wife. It seemed unlikely that the stern, quiet military man had anything in common with the flamboyant, bold, attention-loving blonde, yet they felt an instant mutual attraction. Despite their 5-year age gap, Jeffrey's existing marriage, and Kat's periodic struggles with alcohol, which she continually fought, their relationship blossomed. Jeffrey soon filed for divorce to be with his new love, and within less than 5 months of meeting, they surprisingly tied the knot in a Las Vegas chapel. In 2005, the couple welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Lola. They settled in the quiet town of Sarah, Alabama, Jeffrey's home state, in a custom-built cozy home that Kat personally designed. She adorned their bedroom with portraits of her idol, Marilyn Monroe. Neighbors frequently praised the Wests, describing them as a happy couple despite being complete opposites. Caitlin always strived to look stunning and attractive with bold makeup, stylish hair, and Barbie-like outfits. She thrived on catching people's glances and loved compliments, always appearing cheerful and smiling. Jeffrey, in contrast, seemed overshadowed by her presence, appearing reserved, serious, and highly disciplined, a reflection of his long military career. Despite her efforts and striking looks, Kat couldn't carve out a successful modeling career after marriage and the birth of her daughter. She focused on creating a cozy home and raising her child. Yet the mundane life of a homemaker wasn't enough. She craved attention and recognition. With the rise of social media in the late 2000s, she began actively posting pictures online. Initially, these were harmless Barbie or Marilyn Monroe-themed photos, but gradually they became more provocative and daring. Close sources say her husband not only didn't mind her new hobby but often played the role of her personal photographer. It seemed harmless and eventually became a lucrative venture for Kat through paid subscriptions. One day, they bought a selection of ready-made seafood dishes from a popular local restaurant, a bottle of fine brandy and absinthe from the supermarket, along with aromatic candles Kat picked from a nearby store to set a romantic mood. Captured on surveillance cameras at each location, they appeared happy and carefree, smiling and joking with no hint of the impending tragedy. Returning home with their purchases, the couple enjoyed their dinner and indulged in the alcoholic beverages. Kat, who had intermittently battled alcohol dependency, requested Jeff conduct a hot photo session, first in lingerie and then without any clothes. Jeff was not opposed. He took several revealing shots that were posted on Kat's private OnlyFans profile by around 1 p.m. The romantic evening, intended to culminate in a passionate night, deteriorated into a nightmare that led to a tragic outcome, culminating in the discovery of a body on the road. Early on the morning of January 13th, around 5 a.m., a young neighbor of the West was on her way to work. Although sun had not yet risen, it was light enough outside. As she passed the West's house, something caught her eye. It took her a moment to comprehend what it was. Slowing down, she soon realized an almost fully unclothed woman was lying motionless on the road. Additionally, she thought she saw someone standing on the doorstep of the house, who quickly vanished into the shadows upon noticing her. During questioning, she couldn't definitively state whether this person entered the house or ran off down the street. Startled and uncertain about what to do, the young woman hesitated to approach the body. She returned home and informed her parents. Together, they called emergency services to report this grim discovery. At the operator's request, and while waiting for help to arrive, they reluctantly approached the woman on the ground, recognized as Mrs. West, and checked for a pulse. Tragically, there was none. Her body was cold and already showing signs of rigor mortis. Mrs. West was found face down with most of her body on the sidewalk, dressed only in a bright pink bralette top. A pool of blood had formed under her head, and nearby lay a bottle of absinthe with some of its contents spilled on the road and blood stains on it. A short distance away lay her smashed smartphone. Since it was a quiet residential area, there were no other witnesses during the night. Thus, the time gap between when Mrs. West's car was last seen around 8:30 p.m. and 5 a.m., when the neighbor discovered Caitlin's lifeless body, remains shrouded in mystery, likely only witnessed by her husband. What might Mr. West be concealing? Detective Michael Melhoff was among those first arriving at this troubling scene and proceeded to inquire at the house where Mrs. West's body had been found. A man answered the door appearing somewhat anxious, but professing ignorance regarding the situation at hand. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, he said he'd woken up and didn't find her in bed. The detective then asked him to step outside, informing him that a woman's body, identified by neighbors as Cat West, was found near the house. Throwing on a jacket, the man followed the officer and confirmed that the deceased was indeed his wife. However, Jeff's reaction was unusually calm. He did not rush to the body with tears or screams. When questioned about his whereabouts and activities during the night, Mr. West stated he had slept soundly as they had been drinking the previous evening. When asked what he thought had happened, he merely shrugged, suggesting it might have been an unfortunate accident. Mr. West also shared that his wife suffered from bipolar affective disorder, requiring medication, and struggled with alcohol, behaving erratically when intoxicated. He mentioned that she would sometimes jump on their backyard trampoline, occasionally missing it and injuring herself. A search of the house revealed no signs of a struggle or violence. 2 plates with leftover food, 2 glasses, and a half-empty brandy bottle were on the kitchen table. Her high heels captured in her last pictures lay under the table, and underwear matching the bra she was wearing when found was on the floor. However, several blood-stained napkins in the trash and an open bottle of cleaner raised questions. That day, Jeffrey was taken into custody as the main and sole suspect in the case. Chronologically describing the last evening spent with his wife, Jeffrey noted that she drank heavily, which he greatly disliked. After a revealing photo session, he hoped they would move to the bedroom for a more intimate setting. He stepped away to shower for a few minutes and returned to find his wife still sitting at the table, drinking straight from the bottle and texting someone on her phone. Jeff was angered by this, and his requests to put away the gadget were ignored by Kat. He tried to snatch the phone from her hands, leading to a minor scuffle, during which he accidentally elbowed his wife's face, causing a few drops of blood to appear from her nose. According to him, this was the blood police found on discarded napkins. Mr. West eventually took the phone from his wife and, opening the door, hurled it into darkness. He claimed that, after this event, he turned around and went to bed, convinced that his spouse would soon calm down and join him. He allegedly remained unaware of how events unfolded further until the police knocked on his door, asking about. He speculated that his wife might have gone outside to find her phone, taking the absinthe bottle with her to finish it. He also suggested that she might have fallen, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and froze to death, or that someone might have attacked her. Mr. West couldn't explain why Mrs. West was without the bottom part of her enticing pink lingerie set, or why she went to look for her phone in just a bra without putting on any outerwear hanging near the entrance. He attributed such behavior to alcohol intoxication. The suspect's story seemed suspicious and inconsistent. He claimed to be too intoxicated to remember certain details, leaving the investigation to piece together the sequence of events. The evidence was scarce and there were no witnesses. The autopsy determined that the cause of death for the 42-year-old woman was blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with the absinthe bottle found nearby, compounded by hypothermia. At the time of the incident, her blood alcohol level exceeded 2.5 per ml, indicative of severe intoxication with impaired coordination and a high risk of losing consciousness. At first glance, everything seemed to align. Kat, heavily intoxicated, ventured outside searching for her phone, taking along the unfinished bottle of absinthe. She likely lost her balance, possibly while reaching for her gadget, fell, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and died from the injury and exposure. The bottle with blood traces lay near her head, and the smartphone, the reason she left the house, was found nearby. However, the investigation found this scenario too simplistic and staged. Experts confirmed that the head injury was inflicted with the bottle beside the body. Forensic analysis suggested that if she had fallen on her own, the bottle likely would have rolled away rather than remained parallel to her head. Both Kat's and her husband's fingerprints were found on the bottle, along with several smudged prints that couldn't be identified. The blood-stained napkins and the open bottle of household cleaner discovered in the house led investigators to a different conclusion. Their theory, later presented as the primary and only plausible one in court, suggested the couple argued over Kat's preoccupation with her subscribers. In a fit of anger, Jeff struck her with the bottle, causing a fatal injury. Panicking, he tried to stage an accidental fall by cleaning the blood in the house, but failed to dispose of all evidence. Partially supporting this theory was the fitness app on Jeff's phone, which tracked his steps. According to the app, he was active around the house until midnight and again early in the morning before police arrived. This contradicted his claim of being asleep. Police speculated that he was attempting to conceal evidence during these times. A third person involved, the neighbor who discovered the body, recalled during questioning that she saw a male silhouette on the doorstep who quickly left in an unknown direction. She couldn't confidently assert whether it was Mr. West or someone else in the dim early dawn light. Additionally, she couldn't discern if this person entered the house or not. This information intrigued investigators. Considering Kat's popularity online, she had many male admirers who paid to view revealing photos. A new theory emerged. An obsessed follower among her subscribers might have sought a personal encounter with Kat and tracked her down, hoping for closer acquaintance. While Kat did receive messages from various men, sometimes with inappropriate proposals, she maintained her distance. No explicit threats or harassment were found in these communications. A few particularly persistent fans living in other states with solid alibis were quickly ruled out as suspects. Nevertheless, footprints not belonging to homeowners were found on the doorstep and vanished into the lawn. Their origin remained a mystery. Could Mr. West have harmed his wife? This question lingered as evidence pointed towards multiple potential scenarios yet remained inconclusive overall. Jeffrey's neighbors, friends and relatives described the couple as happy and thriving. He was aware of his wife's unique online activities, but saw them as harmless fun. Jeffrey denied ever being violent towards his wife, stating he loved her too much to hurt her. Nonetheless, arguments had become a frequent occurrence in their household. A particularly telling text exchange dated January 12th was found on their phones where the couple argued heatedly. Kat criticized Jeffrey for not matching her in vivacity and temperament, even suggesting they might be incompatible. Despite this, Jeffrey remained the prime suspect with forensic evidence and gathered details only indirectly implying his guilt. Following his arrest, not only his parents but also his daughter and in-laws rallied in his defense. They were firmly convinced of his innocence and asserted he could never harm his wife. After Jeffrey West's arrest, he couldn't afford the $500,000 bail set for him, which meant he had to stay in custody until his trial, a wait stretching almost 3 years. He was offered a plea deal admitting guilt in his wife's demise in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, Jeffrey adamantly refused, maintaining his innocence. The trial commenced in November 2020 and attracted significant media attention, partly due to Kat's online notoriety. This publicity put considerable pressure on the judges and jurors. The possibility of third-party involvement that fateful night was no longer considered. The prosecution argued that all evidence pointed to Mr. West. They believed that in a fit of jealousy and under the influence of alcohol, he struck his wife with a bottle, causing fatal injuries. In a panic, they suggested he staged the scene to mimic an accident by removing evidence from inside the house. Jeffrey's defense team contended that Kat's death was indeed accidental, citing her extremely high blood alcohol levels as factors affecting her balance and coordination. In heartfelt testimony, Kat's mother supported her son-in-law, describing her daughter as eccentric, but insisted Jeffrey loved her unconditionally and would never harm her. She also appealed to the court to consider their granddaughter Lola, who had lost her mother and stood to lose her father too. On January 11, 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict for involuntary manslaughter. Jeffrey was sentenced to the maximum of 13 years, considering time already served. Notably, if he had accepted the plea deal initially offered, he might have already been free by now. All appeals by Jeffrey and his lawyers have so far been unsuccessful. It's hard to surprise police officers who work with the most egregious criminal elements, but sometimes meanness and cynicism cross all acceptable limits. This occurred once in the careers of New York City Police Department officers who had been on job for over 20 years, dealing with the underworld. It was a case of staggering ingenuity. They had never seen anything like it. On September 2, 2016, police received a call from a victim, a 35-year-old woman, reporting that she'd been robbed. When police officers arrived at her home, Olga Svik, an immigrant from Ukraine who works as a beauty therapist, reported several valuable items missing from her bedroom. She told the arriving patrol officers that she had just been to the hospital because she felt very ill. She was suffering from severe dizziness and nausea. The woman periodically lost consciousness, and even upon returning from the medical facility, seemed somewhat disoriented. In gathering details about the incident, the police interviewed Olga extensively. From her last unpleasant encounters, she recalled a client who came to her house demanding urgent eyelash extensions, Victoria Narova. Victoria had visited the salon before and increasingly acted brazenly as if she and Olga were friends. She was always imposing, but on that day was particularly insistent. Olga replied that she only did such work in the salon and did not accept clients at home. However, it was useless to explain this to Victoria. She did not give in, so Olga had to agree to accept her at home. The victim also mentioned refusing previous social invitations from Victoria, which were persistently offered by her friend. There was another intriguing detail. Victoria bore a strong resemblance to Olga, which always confused the beauty therapist. During the interview, it emerged that on that day, Victoria showed up at Olga's apartment with 3 pieces of cheesecake from a well-regarded local pastry shop. Victoria ate 2 slices with gusto while there. This unusual confluence of events baffled even seasoned New York City police officers. It truly stood out in their extensive experience battling criminal antics in the city. Olga was persuaded to take the 3rd piece of cheesecake after a brief tea gathering. Not long after Victoria had departed, Olga began to feel intensely nauseated and fainted, remaining unconscious for approximately 30 minutes. Upon regaining consciousness, she immediately called 911 and was transported to the hospital by ambulance. Despite thorough blood tests, nothing unusual was detected. Once she returned home, Olga noticed several valuables were missing. She promptly went to the police to report the theft. Initially, the police were skeptical of her story and suspected that she might have been under the influence of illegal substances, given her strange behavior and lethargic appearance. Detectives concluded that her account involving a female doppelganger was fabricated. However, Olga steadfastly denied taking any substances and defended her account convincingly. She asserted that the cheesecake she consumed caused her illness, believing it might have been laced with something harmful. Law enforcement officers conducted a quick inspection of Olga's apartment and discovered a box from a local bakery in the trash can. Olga confirmed this box contained the cheesecake from her meeting with Victoria. The box was taken as evidence due to baking residue left inside. Forensic analysis didn't reveal anything suspicious on it. Despite these findings, Olga remained adamant that the cheesecake was responsible for her condition. She cited her hospitalization and subsequent medical examinations as proof, but acknowledged that none had found any harmful substances in her system. When law enforcement contacted the medical facility to inquire about Olga's condition and test results, doctors refused to disclose information due to patient confidentiality policies. This refusal reinforced police skepticism regarding Olga's claims. The investigation faced further challenges because they couldn't locate Victoria, whom Olga had mentioned. Consequently, the case was stalled until new information emerged from a neighbor who mentioned seeing a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment on the next day following the incident. This woman appeared several times at the beauty master's apartment, hanging around until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman mentioned that her friend, Olga, was sick and quickly left the premises. The neighbor noticed that Olga's apartment door was ajar and glanced to check on her. The space was unbearably stuffy. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was found alive but unconscious. She was lying on her bed in an unusual combination of clothing, revealing underwear paired with warm sports pants. Detectives surmised that someone had deliberately attempted to change Olga's clothes. Scattered around were pills containing a potent drug, suggesting that Olga might have taken them with the intent of harming herself. A neighbor immediately contacted 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive, and bearing a striking resemblance to Olga. Upon learning new details, investigators became convinced that this doppelganger was not a product of Olga's imagination. Thus, they pursued the case more aggressively. Everything in the apartment appeared to be staged to depict a suicide. Detectives suspected Victoria Nerova, a regular cheesecake customer, of being involved. However, they had no leads or information about Victoria's identity or photograph. Later, a private detective, a former police officer, approached the department with valuable insights. He had been investigating this con artist's violent activities for some time and had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and social media platforms. The private investigator believed that Victoria used these online promotions to locate victims for her crimes effectively. Her method seemed flawless. She would visit the homes of clients and then drug them with psychoactive substances so they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity might have stayed hidden indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Olsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. After being discharged from the hospital, she shared on her social networks about the poisoning incident. One of her clients unexpectedly mentioned knowing a man named Ruben Barakov who had a similar experience. Ruben, the owner of a dry cleaner, had met Victoria Nasarova on a Russian dating site a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home, boasting about her culinary skills. He agreed and went to her place. However, as soon as he tasted the dishes, he lost consciousness. She emptied his pockets, taking expensive watches, money, and cards. Under the influence of a strong psychoactive substance, Ruben sincerely believes it almost killed him. Later, when he started regaining consciousness, Victoria took him to his dry cleaners and told his colleagues he was drunk before leaving. Only then did Ruben realize he had been robbed. The private investigator thought the situation was very serious and considered both victims very lucky. In 2017, the investigator worked with a client from Russia to track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to him after the disappearance of her mother, Alla Alexenko. Nadia lived in New York, but was born in Russia and originally from Kadar. Her mother Alla raised Nadia and her brother alone under challenging circumstances, working 5 jobs to provide for them. Nadia always dreamed of living in the USA. Her dream came true in 2007 when she went there to study. In America, she met a man whom she married and took his last name, Ford. However, their marriage did not work out and they divorced. Despite this setback, Nadia stayed and settled successfully in the United States while maintaining close relations with her mother. Alla sold her house because it became difficult to maintain and moved into an apartment. In early 2013, Nadia's mother welcomed a new neighbor, Victoria Nerova. Despite the significant age gap, Victoria quickly became friends with Nadia's mother. This friendship struck many as unusual. Nadia's mother, Alla, often talked about her daughter living in the United States. Inspired by these conversations, Victoria got the idea to visit the US and meet Allah's daughter. Allah arranged the meeting, and in September 2013, Victoria flew to New York. There, she met Nadia and established a close relationship with her. To Nadia, her mother's friend appeared to be a kind and pleasant woman. Victoria frequently asked about ways to stay in the US, receiving advice from Nadia on several occasions. Unfortunately, Victoria's plans fell through and she returned to Russia. Nevertheless, she maintained close communication with Allah. In the fall of 2014, Victoria planned another trip to America and informed Allah about it. She even offered to deliver gifts to Nadia if needed. The trusting Allah was pleased by this offer and requested Victoria to take money totaling over $6,000 along with valuable gifts, including 2 expensive mink fur coats to her daughter in the US. However, Victoria kept postponing her trip for various reasons. This raised concerns for Allah about whether Victoria would ever go or what would become of her valuable items. Worried, Allah called her daughter and expressed her fears. Nadia reassured her mother and suggested that she ask for her things back. On October 4, 2014, Allah called her daughter again, but this time sharing happy news. She had spoken with Victoria, who agreed to return the valuables. Yet, this did not come to pass as planned. Shortly afterward, Allah stopped answering calls, a behavior completely out of character, since they communicated daily without fail. Growing increasingly anxious, Nadia reached out to Victoria asking about her mother's whereabouts. Victoria confirmed that she had last seen Allah when they chatted over tea, but added that after their conversation ended and she left, Allah was never seen again. According to Victoria, Allah was going somewhere, but she didn't know the destination. Allah's son also tried contacting her and even visited her apartment, but his mother wasn't there. The woman never answered her calls. A few days later, the son and daughter of the missing woman got several odd text messages from an unknown number, claiming to be from their mother. These messages advised there was no need to look for her and mentioned she was happy. However, the tone of these texts didn't match Allah's usual style, raising more concerns for the children. Nadia realized something serious must have happened to her mother. She quickly booked a flight to Russia and arrived in Kodar to aid in investigating her mother's disappearance. Nadia first went to her mother's apartment but found it empty. All valuables meant for Victoria were gone too. Nadia then reported her concerns to the police, highlighting a suspicious neighbor who hadn't handed over any valuables intended for her mother. The police took interest and devised a plan. Nadia contacted Victoria and arranged a meeting. During their conversation, Nadia demanded Victoria reveal where her mother was. Victoria became agitated, shouted that Allah was alive but claimed not to know where she was, then fled to her apartment. The police officers who overheard their exchange decided to visit Victoria at home. Victoria managed to convince the investigators that she wasn't involved in the disappearance, since they had no solid evidence against her. Returning to her mother's apartment, Nadia inspected it carefully. She noticed that despite her mother's prolonged absence, the apartment was clean, as if recently tidied up meticulously. Moreover, several valuable items, including jewelry and $50, were missing from her mother's home. Nadia reported this to the police again, but they suggested that perhaps Allah had taken the money and jewelry on a trip and would come back soon. Nadia remained skeptical about this explanation and felt strongly that her mother's plight was connected somehow with Victoria. Determined not to give up, she began an active search by printing out flyers with a photo of her mother and distributing them around the neighborhood. She reached out to all her mother's friends and relatives, but no one had any idea of her whereabouts. Nadia also contacted Victoria, pleading with her to bring her mother back. She was even ready to offer a substantial reward. However, Victoria denied knowing anything. Nadia didn't lose hope and continued searching tirelessly. She visited the police regularly and checked for updates, but there was still no news of her mother's fate. Determined, she hired a private detective. The investigator discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day of the disappearance. After looking over the data on that vehicle, he found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on a highway outside town with two people inside. It appeared that Victoria was behind the wheel, while in the front passenger seat sat a motionless woman who matched the description of Nadia's missing 54-year-old mother, Alla Alexenko. This discovery filled Nadia with renewed hope. Armed with this evidence, she returned to the police. Investigators verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car and called her in for questioning. During the interview, Victoria confessed to driving the car on that morning, but insisted she was alone at that time. Offered a polygraph test, Victoria agreed to take it. Despite taking the test, she was released pending final results. When those results came in, they revealed that Victoria had failed the polygraph test. She promptly became the prime suspect in the investigation. The police aimed to arrest her. However, Victoria managed to use this period of release to her advantage. She caught a flight out of the country without notifying law enforcement. Meanwhile, police intensified their search efforts for Nadia's missing mother. Nadia stayed in Russia for another 6 months, actively engaging in every aspect of the investigation process, holding on to hope that her mother was still alive and seeking help from Interpol to assist with broader search efforts. As part of their investigation, officers retraced the route taken by the rental car, which led them into a wooded area near Armavir, Victoria's hometown. The search for the missing woman began there. The daughter's hopes for her mother's safe return were dashed when the police delivered grim news in April 2015. The charred remains of a person, about 3 hours away from the missing woman's residence, were found in that wooded area. The daughter identified her mother by her dental records since the rest of the body was badly burned and unrecognizable. Unfortunately, the cause of death couldn't be determined. After an arrest warrant for Victoria Nerova was issued internationally through Interpol. However, locating the fleeing suspect took some time. Following her mother's funeral, Nadia returned to the United States and struggled to recover from the loss. Work became impossible for her until she gathered strength, vowing to seek justice for her mother and ensure those responsible would be punished. One day, while browsing the internet, Nadia stumbled upon a photo of Victoria Nerova on social media. The wanted woman was flaunting a luxurious lifestyle in Mexico. Nadia reported this to U.S. authorities, triggering their investigation into Nerova's whereabouts. It was then that Nadia hired one of America's leading private investigators, funded by a wealthy friend since she had been out of work due to her prolonged search efforts. The private detective scrutinized Victoria's social media posts and identified clues from these images. He ascertained that the fugitive had already returned to the United States. In one selfie, sunglasses reflected a car's dashboard, identified as a Chrysler 300, after exhaustive checks of multiple vehicles. Further investigation revealed that recent photos were taken in Brooklyn's Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay by cross-referencing car databases. The continuous and diligent efforts led by both law enforcement and private investigators moved closer to bringing closure and justice for Nadia and her late mother. They managed to narrow down the search and locate the perpetrator despite various challenges. Eventually, they found her location. The detective she lived with her lover in a complex. Also, the Chrysler was registered to her new partner. Victoria probably didn't realize how advanced the case had become and that Interpol was searching for her globally. She posted photos online without fear, unaware that this could expose her. The detective identified the suspect's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out he had already fallen victim to Victoria, who used a familiar poisoning tactic to escape. Tragically, she also poisoned his beagle dog, which died. This intensified public outrage towards her and increased interest in NASA's investigation. On March 20th, 2017, Victoria Nerova, 41 years old, was finally found and detained. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were relieved since leaving her free could have resulted in more victims of her crimes. During a search of Victoria's apartment, investigators found Olga Tisi's identity card. It became clear why Olga became a target. Victoria needed money and valuables, but also required a passport that looked similar to hers, since her temporary visa was about to expire. Investigators speculated that she intended to kill Olga and assume her identity completely. However, this plan failed due to a neighbor's intervention. The container holding the remnants of the poison-laced cheesecake underwent another laboratory analysis. This time, a more comprehensive test examined a wide range of substances in the baked goods, revealing a prohibited drug. The investigation uncovered that Victoria administered this drug to all her victims. Typically used as a sedative, Victoria had increased the dosage to cause her victims to pass out. Fortunately, Olga survived the cheesecake incident. The high temperature in Olga's apartment wasn't accidental. In fact, the heat significantly enhanced the effect of this drug, potentially fatal, and the perpetrator was clearly aware of this fact. Thus, she increased the heating in Olga's home and attempted to dress her warmer, but ran out of time. Upon being taken into custody, Victoria Nerova denied any involvement in Nadia's mother's disappearance and murder. She also denied any involvement in Olga's attempted murder and other similar incidents. It was revealed that Victoria had been a suspect in a fur theft case back in May 2016. However, that case never progressed. Later, several other episodes emerged where she engaged in theft. Meeting men online, traveling to their homes, spiking their drinks with drugs, and robbing them were among her methods. Most men did not report these incidents to authorities due to fear of embarrassment, allowing Victoria to evade consequences. Due to the pandemic and extensive case preparation, hearings were delayed for nearly 6 years. Finally, in January 2023, the case went to trial, garnering much media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria refused to testify or speak at all. Details about Olga's death couldn't be discussed during the trial since that crime occurred in another country. Victoria's defense emphasized there was no concrete evidence or testimony proving Nerova poisoned the cheesecake and coerced Olga into eating it. Olga testified that Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to her apartment and ate 2 herself right in front of her, so she ate 1 piece without any fear. The prosecution argued this wasn't an accident, and Victoria had added the drug to only 1 slice, knowing which one. Thus, she ate the other 2 without any hesitation and deceived Olga. After a lengthy deliberation of the case file, the jury found Victoria Nasarova guilty of attempted second-degree murder. Despite maximum sentence being 25 years in prison under Article, the judge reduced the punishment to 21 years. However, according to the law, she will be able to request parole after 15 years in prison. For the poisoner, hardship began during her 6-year wait for trial. There was no trace of the formerly beautiful and chic woman. Her rich life collapsed in an instant. Prison life proved very harsh. In detention, she constantly complained of poor nutrition and lack of proper treatment. An assault in prison left her scarred and nearly blind. Nasarova sued the prison, alleging negligence on the part of the wardens who failed to help her. The dispute was settled by paying her $325,000. In one of the interviews she gave right in prison, Victoria denied her guilt in all crimes, including Alla's murder. She claimed that she had nothing to do with poisoning Olga's cheesecake. Victoria stated that she had eaten that cheesecake herself and she was fine. She simply shared a piece with Olga but did not force her to eat it. After serving time in a United States prison, she will be deported to Russia, where she will face a trial for Alla's murder. Her daughter Nadia is very happy that Victoria is in prison and will no longer be able to escape punishment. In the somber confines of the courtroom, Menhaz Zaman stood before the judge, his voice trembling with remorse as he expressed the depths of his regret for the irreparable harm he had caused. With heavy hearts, he sought forgiveness from all those he had wronged, especially those who had lost loved ones as a result of his unforgivable actions. Acknowledging the profound damage inflicted upon his family and the wider community, Menhaz bowed his head in shame, unable to escape the weight of his guilt. November 2020 marked the fateful moment when Menhaz's fate was sealed with a life sentence, condemning him to spend the next 4 decades behind bars. At the tender age of 24, he was stripped of his freedom, serving time for the deaths of 4 individuals who had once been dear to him. His father, Manur, taken at 59, his mother, Momotaz, at 50, his grandmother at 70, and his sister, tragically gone at the tender age of 21. Despite the sacrifices made for his well-being, Menhaz's actions had brought nothing but devastation upon his family. As he languished in the confines of his prison cell, Menhaz grappled with the emptiness and loneliness that engulfed his once vibrant life. Cut off from the virtual world he had once sought solace in, he was forced to confront the gravity of his prolonged deception. In the quiet solitude of his confinement, he reflected on the twisted web of lies he had spun to maintain his facade, the weight of his deception bearing down upon him like a leaden burden. The truth of Menhaz's deception came to light as he stood trial, each revelation serving as a painful reminder of the betrayal and deceit that had torn his family apart. The Zan family, once united in love and solidarity, now faced the harsh reality of their shattered lives, haunted by the knowledge that their own flesh and blood had been responsible for their unimaginable loss. In the end, as Menhaz faced the consequences of his actions, he could only hope that his remorse would serve as a meager consolation to those he had wronged. But as the doors of his prison cell closed behind him, he knew that no amount of regret could ever undo the irreparable damage he had wrought upon the lives of those he held most dear. As the fake graduation date of July 28th drew near, Menhaz's behavior took a disturbing turn. Seemingly unraveling before the eyes of those around him, he adopted the persona of a lost soul, referring to himself as a subhuman unworthy of life. Dark jokes about suicide peppered his conversations, revealing the depths of his despair. But who was this troubled individual? Menhaz Zaman, a young Canadian with a promising future, appeared to be living the dream as a mechanical engineering student at York University. However, the truth was far from what it seemed. In reality, Menhaz had never set foot on the university campus. Concealing this fact from his parents, he plunged deeper into a world of deceit, fabricating elaborate tales to maintain his facade of academic success. Each passing year brought new challenges as he struggled to uphold his double life, the pressure mounting as graduation loomed on the horizon. The strain took its toll on Menhaz's mental well-being, pushing him to the brink of desperation. In a desperate bid for attention, Menhaz resorted to unthinkable measures. On that fateful day, he committed the ultimate act of betrayal, snuffing out the lives of his own family members in a chilling display of violence. Posting photos of his heinous crime on his Discord channel, he sought to shock and horrify, drawing the gaze of a horrified audience. While some initially dismissed his actions as a tasteless prank, the grim reality soon became undeniable. Despite Menhaz's efforts to conceal his identity, the truth of his origins lay in a land far from the bustling streets of Toronto. Born from the complex tapestry of Bangladesh, his family had harbored dreams of a better life in the promise of a new beginning. Manyo Zan, his father, and Momas, his mother, had embarked on a journey of hope, leaving behind their homeland to seek their fortune in Canada. Their arrival in Toronto marked the beginning of a new chapter, filled with aspirations for a brighter future. With the birth of Menhaz and later Mesa, they endeavored to create a loving and nurturing environment for their children. Momas, in particular, was hailed as a beacon of kindness and generosity, her unwavering support a source of strength for the family and the broader Bangladeshi immigrant community. Yet, beneath the veneer of normalcy lay a web of secrets and lies, woven by Menhaz in his relentless pursuit of acceptance and validation. The tragic events that unfolded would serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of the human psyche and the devastating consequences of unchecked deception. And as Menhaz's dark descent came to light, the world could only watch in horror, grappling with the incomprehensible depths of his betrayal. Moni Roos, husband to Momotaz, possessed a quiet demeanor that belied his deep sense of pride and devotion to his family. Known as an introvert within the neighborhood, he commanded respect through his modesty and unwavering dedication. A devout Muslim, Moni placed his family above all else, embodying the values of faith and integrity in his daily life. For years, he toiled as a taxi driver, his commitment to his profession earning him recognition as one of the finest in the city. Having relocated to the bustling metropolis in pursuit of a better life, Moni and Momotaz harbored lofty ambitions for their children. Mesa and Menhaz, the apples of their parents' eyes, were envisioned as future pillars of success, destined for lucrative careers that would afford them comfort and prosperity. Despite their own humble beginnings, Moni and Momotaz were determined to provide their offspring with every opportunity for advancement, sparing no effort in their quest for success. Their journey towards prosperity began modestly, with the purchase of a humble abode on Mauen Road in Scarborough. Through prudent financial planning and astute investments, they soon expanded their portfolio, acquiring 2 additional properties in the same area and a house nearby in Danforth. Momotaz assumed the role of property manager, overseeing their growing assets with precision and care. As the family's fortunes continued to ascend, so too did Momotaz's sense of responsibility towards her children and their burgeoning real estate empire. Recognizing the need for support, her mother Fosa made the journey from India to lend a helping hand. With her assistance, Momotaz found equilibrium between her professional endeavors and personal life, ensuring that both flourished in tandem. In 2006, they embarked on a significant investment, purchasing a spacious 4-bedroom house in the neighboring town of Markham. This move symbolized their aspirations for a brighter future, aligning with the widely held belief that success in life hinged on careers in medicine or engineering. Mesa harbored dreams of becoming a neurosurgeon, while Menhaz was earmarked for a career in engineering, in line with his parents' hopes and aspirations. However, the path to success proved arduous, fraught with challenges and unforeseen obstacles. Melissa, their eldest daughter, rebelled against their expectations, often veering off course with reckless behavior. Her defiance strained the familial bonds, leading to conflicts that spilled beyond the confines of their home and attracted the unwanted attention of law enforcement. Despite their best efforts, Moni and Momotaz struggled to rein in Melissa's wayward tendencies, her actions casting a shadow over the family's aspirations. In stark contrast, Menhaz exuded a quiet and reserved demeanor, forging a close bond with his mother, Momotaz. She doted on him, fulfilling his every need and desire, showering him with love and attention. Menhaz, the eldest son, felt the weight of his parents' expectations bearing down on him, driving him to excel and meet their lofty standards. Yet, beneath the facade of familial harmony, Menhaz sought solace in the virtual realm of online gaming, immersing himself in virtual worlds where he found refuge from the pressures of reality. His fascination with MMO games like Perfect World provided an escape from the rigors of everyday life, offering a platform for self-expression and social interaction. While his peers pursued academic endeavors, Menhaz retreated further into the confines of his room, spending hours on end immersed in online gaming communities. Despite the facade of academic success, Menhaz grappled with a sense of inadequacy and the burden of unmet expectations. Upon receiving news of his acceptance into the mechanical engineering program at York University, Menhaz's achievement was hailed as a triumph, further cementing his status as the family's favored child. Yet, beneath the veneer of success lay a mounting pressure to prove himself worthy of their adulation. With each passing day, the weight of expectations bore down on Menhaz, driving him further into the depths of his virtual refuge. As the weight of expectations mounted, Menhaz retreated further into the virtual realm, seeking solace in the digital landscapes of online gaming. Venturing into an enhanced version of the Perfect World game, he found camaraderie among fellow players, forging connections within the confines of this virtual community. Through the popular social network Discord, Menhaz maintained contact with friends and acquaintances, finding a sense of belonging that eluded him in the real world. Within the game, Menhaz shed the constraints of his shy and reserved persona, embracing his true self in a space where authenticity thrived. Here, amidst the pixels and avatars, he felt liberated from the burdens of reality, free to express himself without fear of judgment or censure. The supportive atmosphere fostered friendships that transcended the boundaries of the game, providing Menhaz with a sense of belonging that he struggled to find elsewhere. Meanwhile, Melissa's rebellion continued unabated, her defiance a constant source of tension within the family home. Despite their efforts to rein her in, her actions only served to exacerbate the already strained atmosphere. Her departure from home did little to alleviate the palpable tension, leaving a void that Menhaz sought to fill with his virtual escapades. In the eyes of their parents, Menhaz emerged as the beacon of hope, the embodiment of their aspirations for a brighter future. They boasted of his supposed acceptance into York University's prestigious engineering program, basking in the imagined glory of his academic achievements. However, beneath the facade of parental pride lay a web of deception, as Menhaz's purported success crumbled under scrutiny. In reality, Menhaz's academic journey took a different trajectory, far removed from the lofty heights his parents envisioned. Instead of York University, he found himself enrolled in the less prestigious confines of Seneca Community College, his dreams of academic success shattered. Struggling to keep pace with his studies, he grappled with feelings of loneliness and disillusionment, his sense of identity eroded by the weight of unmet expectations. Frustrated by the suffocating grip of parental control, Menhaz rebelled against the constraints imposed upon him, casting aside the religious beliefs that once anchored him. His disillusionment only deepened as he confronted the stark reality of his circumstances, grappling with a sense of betrayal and abandonment. Amidst the wreckage of broken dreams, Menhaz sought solace in the virtual embrace of online gaming, the only refuge left in a world fraught with disappointment and deceit. Despite his tumultuous relationships and mounting academic struggles, Menhaz sought solace and independence through his online interactions. His burgeoning romance with a girl he met on the internet only served to stoke his parents' disapproval and exacerbate his frustration. Nevertheless, Menhaz remained determined to assert his autonomy, finding refuge in the immersive world of Perfect World and the vibrant Discord community. Initially, Menhaz managed to maintain a facade of academic diligence, but as his obsession with gaming intensified, his grades suffered a precipitous decline. His once promising academic career spiraled into chaos as he began skipping classes and neglecting his studies altogether. Despite his academic freefall, Menhaz managed to conceal the extent of his academic failures from his unsuspecting parents, who remained oblivious to his academic woes. Each day, Menhaz embarked on a carefully orchestrated charade, leaving home ostensibly to attend classes at York University. In reality, he spent his days ensconced in a local cafe, engrossed in his virtual pursuits. From there, he would make a cursory visit to the gym before returning to his online haven, where he whiled away the hours until the late hours of the night. Menhaz's online persona belied the darkness that consumed him, as he frequently joked with his virtual companions about his impending incarceration and his impending departure from their midst. However, beneath the veneer of levity, his humor took on a sinister edge, laced with aggression and hostility. His increasingly provocative remarks drew ire from community members, culminating in his eventual banishment from the platform. Despite the mounting concerns surrounding Menhaz's behavior, his online associates dismissed his antics as mere attention-seeking, failing to recognize the depths of his isolation and despair. As Menhaz retreated further into his virtual cocoon, Melissa sought to forge her own path, severing ties with her family and pursuing her academic aspirations at York University. From the outside, the Zaman family appeared to be on the cusp of a new chapter filled with promise and potential. Yet, unbeknownst to them, Menhaz's descent into darkness would soon shatter the illusion of familial harmony, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. On July 27, 2019, the Zaman household buzzed with the usual activity, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. Menhaz, calculating and methodical, seized the opportunity to set his sinister plan into motion. With chilling composure, he crept into his mother's bedroom, armed with a crowbar. In a swift and brutal assault, he rendered her unconscious with a single blow to the head before mercilessly slitting her throat. The scene of carnage was soon replicated as Menhaz turned his attention to his unsuspecting grandmother, dispatching her with the same ruthless efficiency. Having executed his heinous acts, Menhaz retreated to the confines of his room, his facade of normalcy now shattered. With a sense of perverse satisfaction, he chronicled his atrocities on Discord, sharing grotesque images of his victims' mutilated bodies alongside the implements of his depravity. To some, accustomed to Menhaz's macabre sense of humor, the ghastly display seemed like another tasteless joke. However, for those unaccustomed to such dark behavior, it sparked genuine alarm and disbelief. As the gravity of Menhaz's actions began to dawn on his online acquaintances, panic ensued. The realization that a potential spree of violence was unfolding in real time left them feeling helpless and powerless to intervene. Desperate to prevent further bloodshed, they frantically scrambled to identify the perpetrator, but Menhaz had meticulously concealed his identity, leaving them grasping at straws. Amidst the chaos, Junior, a close friend of Menhaz, found himself bombarded with inquiries from concerned users seeking insight into his friend's motives. Driven by a sense of urgency, Junior confronted Menhaz, seeking confirmation of the grim reality depicted in the disturbing images. Menhaz's chilling response confirmed their worst fears, revealing his intention to claim the lives of his remaining family members. Meanwhile, oblivious to the unfolding tragedy, Melissa returned home, greeted by an eerie silence that belied the horror lurking within. Unbeknownst to her, she had walked into a nightmare orchestrated by her own brother. As she ventured further into the house, she fell victim to the same brutal fate that had befallen her mother and grandmother, her life snuffed out by the hands of her own flesh and blood. In the aftermath of his sister's murder, Menhaz callously documented her demise, capturing her lifeless form in a macabre photograph. With chilling detachment, he shared the image with a friend named John, callously recounting the harrowing ordeal as if it were nothing more than a macabre spectacle to be observed and dissected. In a private message to John, Menhaz uttered words of self-condemnation, branding himself as a pathetic coward and a subhuman, consumed by a profound sense of shame and self-loathing. With a macabre sense of detachment, he proceeded to inundate John with a series of grisly photographs, each one more harrowing than the last. Among them was an image of the murder weapon, and even a disturbing selfie featuring Menhaz himself, brandishing a bloodied knife, a grotesque testament to the depths of his depravity. Horrified by the gruesome evidence before him, John wasted no time in sharing these chilling images with the rest of the Discord group, each photo serving as damning proof of Menhaz's heinous crimes. As the community rallied to gather as much evidence as possible against him, Menhaz continued to play the part of the oblivious gamer, biding his time until his father's return. When Manure, Menhaz's father, unwittingly stepped into the trap laid by his own son, he fell victim to the same brutal fate that had befallen the rest of his family. With cold precision, Menhaz launched his final assault, stabbing his father in the neck, before callously capturing the aftermath in yet another chilling photograph. In the wake of his heinous acts, Menhaz grappled with his own demons, acknowledging his cowardice and selfishness in a series of remorseful messages to his online acquaintances. Expressing a warped sense of resignation, he resigned himself to a life behind bars, inviting his friends to bear witness to the grim spectacle he had orchestrated. Amidst the chaos, one Discord user devised a plan to trace Menhaz's location through his IP address, a digital breadcrumb trail that led authorities straight to his doorstep. As the net closed in around him, Menhaz made no attempt to flee, choosing instead to confront the consequences of his actions head-on. 12 agonizing hours after the bloodshed, law enforcement officers descended upon the Zaman residence, their suspicions confirmed by the sight of Menhaz peering down at them from his bedroom window. Surrendering himself to the authorities without resistance, Menhaz offered no protest as he was led away in handcuffs, his stoic demeanor betraying no hint of remorse or regret. Charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, Menhaz stood trial as the weight of his crimes bore down upon him. With the damning evidence amassed by the online gaming community serving as irrefutable proof of his guilt, there remained little doubt as to his ultimate fate. In the end, justice prevailed, but the scars left behind by Menhaz's reign of terror would linger for years to come, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks within the human soul. British Sabrina Quieter had every chance of achieving the fabulous, rich, and carefree life she dreamed of from an early age, but it was never enough for her. No partner was good enough for her, and she constantly felt like she was born for fame, attention, and luxury. Her unrealized ambitions and obsessive fantasies eventually escalated into delusions with bouts of violence. Unfortunately, Sabrina found a defenseless man on whom she vented all her anger. This case became one of the most heinous and high-profile in British history. An innocent girl who cared for her children became the victim of a deranged sadist. Sabrina Kuiter. Early years. Sabrina Kuiter, born on December 5, 1982, in a London suburb, had a distinctive blend of French and Algerian heritage from her parents. This unique mix likely contributed to her striking appearance and fiery temperament. The eldest of 4 children, Sabrina was the darling of her family, constantly praised and set as a model for others. At the age of 2, her family emigrated to France, settling in Paris, where she spent most of her childhood and youth. Sabrina's complex character began to manifest in her school years. Her former classmates later recalled that she was arrogant, domineering, self-absorbed, and extremely selfish. She had few friends, either at school or among her neighborhood peers, considering everyone around her unworthy of her time. To other bright, outgoing girls, she was particularly hostile, viewing them as competitors and enemies. With her stunning looks, a striking brunette with brown eyes and an impressive figure, Sabrina could have pursued a career in modeling if she had the ability to connect with others, rather than just seeking to manipulate them. As a child, she was active in sports and showed some interest in music during her youth, but her inconsistency, impatience for quick results, and lack of effort hindered her success in any field. Years later, Sabrina claimed she experienced harsh treatment from her maternal relatives in France during her early years. However, these claims were never substantiated or proven. Contrarily, her family insisted that she was indulged and always sought attention. As a teenager, while active in sports, Sabrina suffered a back injury, leading to a dependence on prescription painkillers. She tried to obtain these drugs illegally, leading to her arrest and a police warning. Sabrina was always intensely focused on herself and her appearance, craving constant attention. She had no doubt that her future held a wealthy, glamorous life filled with celebrity interactions and her own stardom. Sometimes it seemed her fantasies clouded her reality, as she believed her rightful place was in Hollywood. Sabrina graduated from the Sorbonne with a degree in English and French literature. However, since 2006, she claimed various fashion industry professions such as stylist, makeup artist, fashion designer, or designer, though she lacked real expertise in these areas. Complex relationship with Wissem Madouni. Sabrina Kuiter, known for her stunning looks, had a penchant for captivating men and exploiting their affection, but she never saw any of her suitors as worthy of a serious relationship. She was literally waiting for a prince who would completely obey her. After finishing school, Sabrina was still unclear about her life goals, feeling entitled to everything without effort. Nevertheless, she enrolled at the prestigious Sorbonne University and simultaneously worked at a sweet shop for financial support. It was there, at the age of 18, that she met Wissem Madouni. Madouni, 6 years her senior, was a manager at a major French company's head office and studied at one of Paris's most prestigious universities. He aspired to a master's degree for career advancement. Despite not being particularly handsome, part of elite clubs, or in the celebrity circle, he fell deeply in love with Sabrina and was willing to fulfill all her whims and fancies. Sabrina, too, found Madouni appealing, seeing him as someone she could manipulate yet also as a ticket to a wealthy life. He was ambitious and capable of great career success and was ready to pamper and spoil her. The couple began dating in 2000 and within a few months decided to move in together. Sabrina quickly revealed her true nature, striving to control Madouni in every aspect. If her demands were not met, she resorted to tantrums, manipulations, and even physical violence. Moreover, she soon started openly cheating on Madouni, not bothering to hide it or justify her actions. She could engage in flings with anyone, from a random acquaintance to Madouni's best friend or colleague. Despite several attempts to end the relationship and leaving her, Madouni always returned, unable to break free from his deep love for Sabrina. In 2001, Madouni achieved his master's degree and a significant promotion. He began earning a substantial income, which he spent lavishly on Sabrina's luxurious clothing and entertainment. His family owned several properties in Paris, and he managed them, giving all the rental income to Sabrina. Maduni, who also had Franco-Algerian roots, saw a kindred spirit in Sabrina. According to some reports, in the fall of 2001, the couple married in a special Muslim ceremony, evidenced by a certificate issued by the Argenteuil Mosque. However, this religious ceremony was insufficient to make the union official and legal. The couple had a son, whose paternity Maduni officially recognized. However, years later, a Frenchman named Anthony Francois claimed he was the child's father. Francois, a witness in Queter's trial, described her as volatile, unpredictable, promiscuous, and manipulative. Relocation to London. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit hard, leading to the bankruptcy of the company where Wissem Maduni worked, resulting in the loss of his high-paying job. It was around this time that Sabrina Queter developed a fixation on moving to London. She made the move without much consultation with her partner. Left with little choice and hoping for a new career start in one of the world's major financial hubs, Maduni followed her to London. Once in London, Maduni found employment in a major English bank. However, Sabrina struggled to find her footing in the fashion industry. Her aspirations to become a designer, model, or makeup artist were hindered by a lack of skills, experience, and formal education in these fields. Consequently, she had to lower her expectations. Over time, she worked in various capacities, including as a nanny, in a call center, a cafe, and even tried her hand at network marketing. Romance with Mark Walton. Sabrina Queter's quest for love took a turn when she rekindled her teenage passion for music, adding the titles of musician and composer to her resume. Despite her enthusiasm, Sabrina struggled to find professional opportunities in the music industry. She attended numerous auditions and social events, hoping to make valuable connections. At one of these events, Sabrina fortuitously met Mark Walton, a renowned musician, songwriter, and one of the founding members of the famous Irish boy band, Boyzone. After leaving the group, Mark became a successful producer and music mogul, collaborating with artists like Jennifer Lopez, Jessica Simpson, and Lady Gaga. By 2016, his net worth had exceeded $1 billion. Mark was precisely the kind of person Sabrina had dreamt of meeting, her ticket to a world of fame and luxury. She managed to impress Mark with her beauty and charisma. He was captivated by her and openly admitted falling in love at first sight, unable to think of anyone but the stunning woman. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and Sabrina made efforts to remain pleasant and endearing, quickly ending her relationship with Maduni as she saw a promising future with Mark. His previous relationship and child were no deterrent for her. Within weeks, the lovers moved in together, residing in a luxurious house in an upscale area of London. Mark took on all the expenses, including the rent for the lavish house chosen by Sabrina. For several months, Sabrina lived the opulent life she had long aspired to, socializing with celebrities, attending elite events, wearing couture clothing, and even appearing in glossy magazines. However, managing Mark proved challenging for Sabrina, as she feared losing him. She couldn't control her nature for long and soon began to show jealousy towards every woman around Mark. Sabrina's demands increased over time, seeking more gifts and luxury. Mark indulged her with designer clothes, jewelry, and outings to high-end restaurants and clubs, but it was never enough for her. The couple's home had a high turnover of staff and nannies, as Sabrina's paranoia led her to believe they were either stealing or attempting to seduce Mark. Her irrational behavior eventually drove Mark to his breaking point. In 2011, he ended the relationship and left for California, leaving Sabrina with nothing. Losing Mark also meant losing the lavish lifestyle she had enjoyed. Sabrina started giving interviews, accusing Mark of cruelty, violence, and substance abuse. She called him, crying, begging him to return, and even threatened to take her own life. But none of these tactics brought him back. Who is the father of the second child? After realizing she had lost Mark Walton, Sabrina Queter reached out to her ex-partner, Wissem Maduni. Maduni, whose career was flourishing as a bank executive, immediately forgave and accepted her back, still harboring feelings for her. They resumed living together. Shortly after reuniting with Maduni, Sabrina discovered she was pregnant. She quickly informed Walton, who, through his lawyers, expressed willingness to provide for the child and Sabrina, offering a monthly allowance. However, Walton insisted on a paternity test post-delivery to confirm his fatherhood. Sabrina's refusal to undergo the test, which could have secured her substantial regular payments, hinted at her uncertainty about the child's paternity. Instead of agreeing to the test, she demanded Walton double the proposed allowance. Upon his refusal, she declared war on the musician. Sabrina took to social media, spreading false claims that Walton was obsessed with her, insanely jealous of Maduni, and was physically threatening them. She accused Walton of breaking into their home, assaulting Maduni, scaring the children, and sexually assaulting her in unnatural ways. However, she couldn't substantiate her claims as Walton had a solid alibi, being in the United States since their breakup. After Walton filed a defamation lawsuit and the police threatened action against her, Sabrina temporarily ceased her accusations against the ex-boyfriend. She settled in Wimbledon, southwest London, with Maduni and their 2 children, leading a seemingly quiet life as the conflict appeared to be resolved. French nanny Sabrina Queeter, unaccustomed to managing household chores and finding it challenging to handle 2 children, decided to hire a nanny who could also assist with housework. She posted a job advertisement online and personally conducted interviews. Most candidates did not meet her expectations, and those who did not stay long in her household. A young French woman named Sophie Lyonnais responded to the advertisement. At the time, 19-year-old Sophie was in her provincial hometown in France, so the interview was conducted via video call. This modest, unassuming provincial agreed to all terms: childcare, household help, and cooking for a symbolic weekly pay of 50 British pounds, including full board and lodging with the employer. Sophie was born on January 7, 1996, in the small town of Troyes, situated between Auxerre and Sens. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Lyonnais, were simple workers, leading a modest, if not poor, lifestyle. After finishing school, Sophie obtained a diploma in childcare but did not wish to work in her province, aspiring instead to move to a big city. Known for being shy, quiet, and plain in appearance, but very kind and open-hearted, Sophie was loved by those who knew her. Due to poor vision, she wore glasses, which she was somewhat self-conscious about. During their conversation, Coiter realized that Sophie, the plain Jane, would be an ideal target for her manipulations. Moreover, Sophie was eager to gain experience and good references, thus willing to work for minimal wages. To Sophie, Sabrina seemed like a serious and reliable employer, a fact she shared with her parents before departing for London. As kind employers turned into sophisticated sadists. Initially, things seemed to go well for Sophie Lyonnais, who naively believed that working for the Queeters would be an excellent start to her nanny career. She quickly bonded with the children, managed household chores as per her contract, and had enough time and resources to improve her English and explore city attractions. This peaceful period lasted several months and all seemed well. Problems began when Maduni lost his job, and the family's only stable income became the monthly child support payments from Walton. Sabrina again demanded increased payments from Walton, who in turn requested a DNA test to confirm his paternity. The family faced serious financial issues, struggling with expensive rent and basic living expenses. Sabrina, unwilling to cut back on her luxuries and desperate to maintain her socialite lifestyle, became irritable and aggressive, often taking out her anger on the young nanny. The couple attempted to start a bakery business with their last funds, but it failed. Sabrina then turned to Walton, asking for a substantial amount of money to launch her clothing line, only to be met with a categorical refusal, leading to tears and complaints about poverty. Sabrina frequently complained to Lyonnais about her ex-lover, and the nanny tried to console her employer. What happened next varies depending on the source. According to one version, Coiter conceived a plan to use Sophie as a weapon for blackmailing Walton. She intended to portray Sophie as Walton's accomplice and lover, supposedly planted in their home to disrupt their lives and endanger the children. Sabrina claimed that the provincial fool was in love with Walton, who used her as a tool for revenge. She believed that recording the nanny's confessions on tape or video and presenting them to the police would be sufficient evidence to demand compensation from Walton for his heinous act. However, Sophie refused to give false statements on camera. Another version, as argued by Quater's lawyers in court, suggested that due to her mental disorder, Sabrina genuinely believed in her conspiracy theory and saw Sophie as an enemy and a threat to her family. She allegedly didn't force the Manny to give false testimony, but truly believed Sophie was Walton's accomplice, infiltrated into their household to harm them. Regardless of the truth, Sophie's life soon turned into a living nightmare. Torture chamber in the basement of a wealthy home. Initially, young Frenchwoman Sophie Lyonnais was burdened with extra work without a corresponding increase in her meager salary. Eventually, she was engaged in endless chores from dawn till late night, with no personal time and effectively imprisoned within the house walls. Sophie's pay was soon halted entirely, and to prevent her escape or return to France, her employers confiscated her passport, making her a captive. Her communication with family was strictly monitored. The situation worsened. Sophie was barely fed and constantly pressured to give false statements against Walton, whom she had never met or known. She was communicated with solely through screams, insults, and threats. Accused of stealing money and valuables, she was threatened with imprisonment if she failed to comply with their demands against the musician. When screaming and blackmail proved ineffective, the Cooters resorted to more brutal and sophisticated methods. Sophie was effectively relocated to a cold basement, where she spent all her time when not working. Fed scantily once or twice a day, she became emaciated and weak. However, the cold and hunger were not the worst she endured. Physical abuse became the most torturous stage. It started with slaps and hair pulling, but escalated when Sabrina broke Sophie's nose in a violent assault. The sight of blood seemingly unleashed Sabrina's fury, turning beatings into a daily ordeal for Sophie. Each day brought new methods of cruelty designed to inflict unbearable pain and suffering. The basement of this wealthy house in an affluent London area turned into a real torture chamber for Lyonnais, with no hope of rescue. Strange visit to the police station. In late summer 2017, Sabrina Courter brought the unfortunate Sophie Lyonnais to a police station, claiming that Sophie was ready to testify against Mark Walton, with whom she allegedly had a romantic and criminal relationship, and who had supposedly sent her to their house to abuse the children. However, Sophie remained silent, refusing to say what Sabrina demanded. The police decided to speak with Sophie privately and took her to a separate room. Sabrina was furious, fearing that Sophie would reveal the horrors happening at their home and implicate her and her husband. Mysteriously, Sophie chose not to disclose anything or seek help. The police's response was also peculiar. Despite seeing a malnourished, frightened, and weakened young woman, they did not call a doctor or a psychologist to ensure her well-being and safety. At that point, the 21-year-old Manny weighed less than 40 kilograms, had partially lost her hair, was missing a front tooth, and was noticeably limping. Yet none of this raised any concern with the officers, who simply let everyone go home. Disturbing phone call and a funeral pyre. In mid-September, Sophie Lyonnais made her final call to her mother. Sobbing, Sophie confessed to her mother that she wanted to return home but had no money. Catherine, without delving into details, simply told her daughter that she would buy her a ticket and asked her to pack her bags immediately. This was the last time she would hear Sophie's voice. A few days later, on September 20th, 2017, in the evening, the Queeters' neighbors called the police. They were alarmed by a fire in the yard, not so much by the fire itself, but by the nauseating, sweetly greasy smell emanating from it. A neighbor said he immediately realized it smelled like burning flesh and hair, along with something unidentifiable. And the thick smoke that stretched half a block instantly impregnated clothes and skin with this stench. Firefighters and a police car arrived at the scene. The house owners, appearing calm and seemingly unaware of the reason for the emergency services visit, met them. After extinguishing the fire, what looked like a charred human hand was discovered in the ashes. The couple was immediately taken into custody, and severely burnt human remains were extracted from the fire. The gender and age of the deceased were indeterminable, but soon the body was identified as Sophie Leonet's, recognized by the melted metal frame of the glasses embedded in the skull, which Sophie always wore. Cause of death. Determining the cause of Sophie Leonet's death was challenging, as her body was almost entirely destroyed by fire. Forensic experts found multiple rib fractures, jaw cracks, and evidence of blunt force trauma on her skull and limbs, indicating she had suffered these injuries while still alive. Additionally, several of her teeth were missing, and her nose was severely damaged. It became clear that Sophie had endured prolonged and brutal beatings, resulting in broken bones and knocked-out teeth. However, assessing the state of her internal organs and identifying any penetrating wounds was impossible due to the extent of the fire damage. The discovery of horrific video recordings in the house, showing Sophie being tortured and coerced into confessing collusion with Walton and intent to harm the children, revealed the true sadistic nature of her captors. Sophie was beaten with fists, an iron cord, a golf club, and even subjected to electric shock torture. She also endured humiliations, such as being forced to submerge her head in a toilet until she began to suffocate. According to experts, Sophie likely died from asphyxiation before being burned on the pyre, sparing her from the agony of being alive during the burning. Trial and sentence. Sabrina Kuiter and Wissem Medouni denied guilt and displayed no remorse for their brutal crime. After the murder, Medouni calmly went to a nearby supermarket to buy firelighter fluid for burning the body and dinner for his family, behaving as if nothing unusual had happened. The first court hearings against the sadistic couple began in March 2018. Sabrina tried to portray herself as a victim, blaming Mark Walton for driving her to a pathological state with his relentless torment. Medical examinations confirmed Sabrina had mental disorders but was not insane and could comprehend her actions. Wissem, physically healthy, was psychologically dependent on Sabrina, dominated and blindly obedient to her. A former lover of Sabrina, testifying in court, described her as a cunning manipulator, not a madwoman, as she calculated her moves too shrewdly. Another witness stated she always fabricated enemies, but did so rationally, with selfish motives. On June 26, 2018, the court found the couple guilty of torturing, humiliating, and murdering their nanny under aggravating circumstances. They were sentenced to life imprisonment, eligible for parole only after 30 years. Neither admitted guilt, continuously appealing to mitigate their sentences. Sabrina attempted to feign insanity, hoping to move from prison to a hospital, but was unsuccessful. Mark Walton, present at the trial, expressed guilt over his ex-lover's actions, as she committed these atrocities to gain his attention and financial compensation. He offered his deepest condolences to the victim's parents and voluntarily issued a substantial check to support the grief-stricken family who lost their beloved daughter. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, All his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, La Barre, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, La Barre met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and La Barre remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy La Barre was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating, or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera. And later, this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon, Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was an avid motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers a criminal organization, the second largest in the world after the Hells Angels. His parents divorced when he was around 10 years old. However, they maintained a good relationship and were equally involved in their son's upbringing. His father's love of motorcycles gradually passed on to Brandon. At the age of 25, he had his own motorcycle which he had assembled by hand and treasured dearly. He often spent time with other bikers, but did not belong to any motorcycle club. The unexpected death of Brandon's father in April 2005 was a very challenging experience for him. Trying to overcome the growing depression, Brandon decided to make a change in his life. He got on a motorcycle and drove to Las Vegas. After living in Vegas for about a year, Brandon met 24-year-old Amber Andrews, whose company helped him forget his problems. Their romance happened quickly, and they got married just 2 months after meeting. By this time, Amber was already pregnant. In December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child was a crucial change in Brandon's life. He became a caring father and husband who worked at a high-paying job and prioritized his family over his personal interests. However, the same could not be said about Amber. Seemingly indifferent to the birth of their child, she remained devoted to her lifestyle, frequently attending biker gatherings and various parties. As a result, their family's relationship began deteriorating rapidly, sometimes leading to conflicts. Inevitably, this situation culminated in a divorce, filed 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of the child, as he was better able to provide for both himself and his son. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker in Oklahoma, while Brandon went back to San Diego with his son. He was happy to be reunited with his family, who later assisted him in raising the child. Over time, the emotional scars from the failed marriage began to heal, and Brandon regained his optimism about the future. However, while contemplating the future, the past came knocking at his door. In the summer of 2012, he saw his ex-wife Amber on his doorstep. She wanted to reconcile and asked him to give their relationship another chance. The feelings that Brandon had diligently suppressed resurfaced. He believed in the sincerity of his ex-wife and agreed to a fresh start. In September, their son Brando was supposed to start kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to see their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they started preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son returned to San Diego, Van Emblem contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Van reported that his friend and employer, 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Gavin County, had asked for help to dispose of a body, claiming it was the body of Brandon Duran. After receiving the call from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation about a possible crime, the local sheriff and his assistant immediately went to the ranch owned by Hammer. Authorities also contacted Brandon's relatives from San Diego, but they found that Brandon was unreachable for several days until they confirmed the information provided by Van. They decided not to disclose the details of this case to Brandon's family. During questioning, Justin Hammer quickly confessed to murdering Brandon Duran. However, Hammer claimed he acted in self-defense, describing Duran as a dangerous motorcycle gang member who had threatened him. Hammer alleged that on August 7th, Brandon had driven up to his house on a motorcycle, kicked open the door, gone inside, and started threatening him. Hammer stated that he had a close personal connection with Amber, which prompted Brandon to pay him an unexpected visit. According to Hammer, Brandon threatened him, ordering him to stay away from Amber, and warning that he would ask his biker friends to harm him severely, even suggesting that his family members would be targeted if he didn't comply. Supposedly, Hammer then picked up a shotgun from the corner of the room and fired it, only to discover that he had killed Brandon. Afraid of retaliation from the Banditos motorcycle club, Hammer chose not to contact the police and instead opted to cover up all evidence of the incident. Justin relocated the body to the bathroom, where he dismembered it using a saw and then placed the parts into 5-gallon buckets. He filled the buckets with cement to encase the remains. According to his statement, the buckets were too heavy for him to load into his pickup truck by himself, so he enlisted the help of his friend Van. After disposing of the body, Hammer thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence. He then burned the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags he had used. Additionally, he claimed to have given Brandon's motorcycle to a relative, who took it apart for spare parts. The officers went to Meeker to break the devastating news to Amber. After learning about the death of her child's father, the woman was left in shock. Despite being divorced, she and Brandon had planned to reconcile and start living together again. Amber revealed that she had gotten into a fight with Brandon the previous day, triggered by his discovery of her romantic relationship with Justin Hammer. Following their argument, Brandon stormed off on his motorcycle, vowing to confront her lover himself. The investigation revealed new evidence that raised significant doubts about the credibility of Hammer's testimony. Criminologists conducting a search of Hammer's home discovered that the door had been kicked in from the inside, and the shoe print on the door matched the sneakers worn by Hammer, strongly indicating that he was responsible for knocking down the door. Furthermore, they uncovered a list of items necessary for disposing of a body and a gun safe, suggesting that the crime was premeditated rather than spontaneous, and that Hammer had been preparing for it in advance. Apart from the 5 buckets, they additionally extracted a cement-filled doghouse from the pond that held extra fragments which did not fit into the buckets. This key evidence led to Justin Hammer being formally charged with first-degree murder. The forensic medical expert faced a challenging task in analyzing the 25 separate body fragments of Duran. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been shot 4 times in the head, with 3 pistol shots and 1 shotgun blast. According to the expert, the shotgun gun blast was the final shot, and by then, Brandon was likely deceased and lying on the floor. This contradicted Hammer's statement, which claimed he had fired only once with a shotgun. However, this didn't add up to the investigators. They wondered why Hammer would use a shotgun after firing 3 pistol shots, especially since Brandon was already dead. This evidence hinted that someone other than Hammer might have been involved in the crime. The investigators' call to Brandon's mother, Cindy, left her stunned when they told her about her son's death. Once she recovered from the shock, Cindy explained that Brandon had never been a member of the Banditos motorcycle club. She said that Brandon's father had passed on his love for motorcycles to his son, but it never went beyond that. Cindy also mentioned another interesting detail. When Brandon left for Oklahoma, his bike was broken, and he had loaded it into the back of his pickup truck, hoping to fix it there. Cindy also said that Brandon avoided conflict and that his ex-wife, Amber, was the source of all his problems. Amber's infidelity had plagued their relationship from the start. Even after the birth of their son, Amber continued her lifestyle, and whenever Brandon expressed his disapproval of her behavior, she would start a fight. All this eventually led to a divorce, with Brandon getting full custody of their son, which made Amber furious. She then disappeared for over a year, showing no interest in her son's life. So, when she suddenly appeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and his family were shocked. After learning about Justin Hammer and Amber's romantic relationship, the investigators turned their attention to Brandon's ex-wife. Amber told the police that Brandon had left on a motorcycle following their argument. However, his family contradicted this, saying the motorcycle was broken. This raised a question. If the breakage was not severe, why would Brandon take the motorcycle all the way to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? Amber had never mentioned that Brandon was repairing it. Amber also claimed she had a doctor's appointment on the day Brandon went to deal with Hammer, but the police found no evidence of her visit to any medical facility in the city. This meant Amber had no solid alibi for the time in question. Further investigation revealed that Amber had asked a friend to babysit her son on the day of Brandon's death. When the friend arrived at 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together in Brandon's pickup truck with a motorcycle in the back. Amber had left her phone at home and didn't return for 8 hours. When she finally did, Brandon and his motorcycle were no longer in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, investigators discovered a message she had received shortly before she and Brandon left the house. The text, sent by Justin Hammer, read, "The ink is ready." Investigators suspected that this was a coded message, indicating that everything was in place to deal with Brandon. Following interviews with Amber's close friends, detectives learned that she had no intention of reconciling with her ex-husband and consistently spoke ill of him. She harbored a strong resentment towards Brandon, who had been granted full custody of their son, and viewed him as uncool, referring to him as a square. Soon, the authorities discovered physical evidence that contradicted Amber's story. Handwriting analysis revealed that Amber had written the note found in Hammer's safe, which detailed the items needed to dispose of a body. Upon reviewing the local hardware store's CCTV footage, police found evidence that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. The footage showed Hammer buying buckets and other items from a list Amber had written the day before Brandon's murder. However, while awaiting trial, Hammer insisted that he did not have an accomplice and acted in self-defense. He claimed that the items on Amber's list were needed to repair the house, not to dispose of a body. Furthermore, Hammer explained that he used 2 types of weapons, stating that he held a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. This statement was considered unusual by the investigators. The jury has recommended a life sentence without parole for Hammer, deliberating for only about an hour and a half, despite expectations of a trial that would last several weeks. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the verdict, deeming it appropriate and a means of providing justice for Brandon Duran's family. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, was also pleased with the jury's decision, acknowledging that it was a difficult choice, but one she had been hoping for over the past 2 years. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating his remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber pleaded not guilty, hoping to be released on bail. However, the district judge denied the request, stating that the nature of the allegations warranted the denial of bond. In the spring of 2017, the trial got underway. Prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin made the case that Amber was the mastermind behind the crime. They alleged that she had lured Brandon to her lover's house, where Hammer shot him 3 times with a pistol. Amber then fired the final shot from a shotgun, according to the prosecutors. Throughout the trial, the prosecutors emphasized that all witness statements and evidence pointed to Amber's direct involvement in the crime. They argued that she was the only person with a motive to want Brandon out of the way. The defense attorney, Jay Mendros, argued that the prosecutor's office failed to provide any evidence linking Amber to the case, dismissing the allegations as a conspiracy theory. According to Mendros, Amber was not a cold-blooded killer, and Justin Hammer committed the murder because he was afraid of losing her to Brandon Duran. Mendros described the situation as a perfect recipe for disaster, with Duran returning to Oklahoma to rekindle his relationship with Amber Andrews, while Hammer, who had dated Andrews for a year, felt threatened by Duran's presence. Mendros emphasized that Justin Hammer had a clear motive to kill Duran, citing the love triangle between Hammer, Andrews, and Duran. He stressed that the situation was complex, with Andrews having relationships with both men and frequently going back and forth between them. The prosecution, Mendros claimed, had twisted and distorted the evidence to make it appear sinister. He alleged that the prosecution was attempting to convict Amber based on suspicion and innuendo, rather than concrete evidence. Mendros pointed out that Justin Hammer had confessed to the murder, stating that he acted alone. This, Mendros argued, was the only concrete evidence in the case, and it did not implicate Amber as a conspirator or murderer. Jurors delivered a guilty verdict after more than 4 hours of closing arguments in a Gavin County District courtroom, recommending 35-year-old Amber Andrews be sentenced to life in prison. Sentencing was set for June 12, 2017. At the hearing, Amber appeared in a good mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, emotionally took the witness stand to express the impact of her son's death on her and her grandson. Before the judge's verdict, defense attorney Jay Mendros made another statement, saying, "It's still the defense's position that there's nothing that ties her to this murder." Mendros told the judge there's no evidence that she was involved in this murder. He would ask the judge to disregard the jury's verdict and reset the case, arguing that the state's case was void of evidence and played on jurors' emotions to get the guilty verdict. Amber Andrews was given a life sentence without parole for the murder of Brandon Duran in the first degree. She also received 7 years for desecrating his remains and another 10 years for conspiring to commit a felony. Her accomplice, Justin Hammer, is currently serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Andrews is incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. As for Brandon's son, Brando, he has been in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services since August 7, 2012, and has been living with a foster family. After a long battle with the court system, Cindy, Brando's grandmother, was finally able to bring him back to San Diego in January 2013 to live with her. However, it took her 5 more years to gain full custody of Brando. After the trial, Cindy and her relatives told Brando the truth about the verdict and his mother, Amber Andrews. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his formative years and received his education. At the age of 20, he made the decision to join the military, driven by a desire to defend his country. Christopher discovered his true calling and committed himself wholeheartedly to serving his nation with honor and unwavering dedication. As a guardian of the citizens' peace, this decision influenced the course of his life. Christopher was sent to a military base near the town of Marquette. There, on the military base not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they would see each other, and a mutual attraction arose at first sight. The young people often met on the streets of the city and felt too shy to greet each other, but over time, they began to walk together. Their communication became more and more frequent and intimate, and eventually it grew into a close friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because Christopher's military service did not allow him to pursue a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer. In December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always maintained a proper relationship. After a short period, The lovers recognized that they shared numerous common interests: a deep appreciation for nature, a preference for a balanced lifestyle, and a yearning for serenity. This is why Iron River proved to be the ideal location for both of them. The couple reached the decision to cohabitate. Christopher relocated to live with Terry, secured employment at a factory manufacturing components for naval vessels, and before long, had subordinates reporting to him. Life was unfolding in the most favorable manner possible. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As they did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here, he found not only a job but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In this new city, Chris was about to begin his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was deeply concerned. She had tried reaching him for several days, and worried, she contacted their shared acquaintances, but they had no information. 10 days later, a distressed Terry filed a missing person report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was registered, but the police swiftly reassured Terry, stating that people occasionally vanish for a time before returning, sometimes even settling in other locations. At the police station, Terry also mentioned that Christopher had recently been offered a job in North Carolina, implying he may have made it to his new residence and chosen to start afresh, cutting ties with the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, surprisingly, no information could be obtained, as Christopher had not shown up for work for 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search teams ventured into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to assist in the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him, and perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, and closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to suspect that the case might be connected to a crime. After inspecting Christopher's home, they decided to start a larger-scale search for him. The police carefully searched the neighborhood and eventually found Reagan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It seemed unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally, so they had to break into one of the doors to access the vehicle. The interior contained only ordinary items such as a hat, coat, and gloves, but one of the policemen noticed a small piece of yellow paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it, though no specific address was provided. The authorities decided to follow the route indicated in the note. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper, which took them to a neighboring town, stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes. The investigators knocked on the door, needing to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife Kelly soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Reen, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages, but received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. The investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car. Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation involved interviewing Christopher's co-workers. The detectives visited the factory, where they spoke with employees and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors about this had been circulating for months. This new information piqued the investigators' interest, and they decided to re-interview the Cochran couple to clarify the nature of their relationship. Ultimately, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher had indeed been involved in an affair, but she was unable to disclose this previously due to her husband's presence. She explained that she and her husband Jason have an open relationship, and Jason is generally accepting of his wife's affairs. However, the topic was sensitive, and it may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers disputed Kelly's claims, stating that Jason was strongly opposed to the affair, and there was no casual relationship in the Cochran family as Kelly had suggested. Jason himself had a conversation with the police that revealed he was vehemently against his spouse's unfaithfulness, though this stance made him a suspect. However, the lack of decisive evidence made it impossible to determine that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance, and the officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious case remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator, Jeremy Ogden, who immediately began actively working on it. Ogden's initial task was to thoroughly analyze the Cochran family's history. He learned that Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and they began living together immediately after graduation. The two had very different personalities. Kelly was socially adept and loved to talk, while Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity, only answering questions when asked. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married and started their own company providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest but brought them a decent income, with most of the work taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health, and he began to have back problems, feeling heavier and heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he was unable to continue the business, and Kelly took over all the work of running it. During this challenging time, Kelly sought ways to help her husband recover, and she discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the use of this plant in medical practice had just begun, and it was prohibited in the state where they resided. The only option for Kelly and Jason to obtain the drug was to relocate, and they decided to move to Iron River Township, Michigan in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult a doctor and receive a prescription for the remarkable plant, ultimately finding relief from his suffering. In early 2014, the couple found employment at a plant that specialized in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, where they worked alongside Christopher. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and she and Christopher became close friends, which was particularly important for Christopher, who had been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. The investigation continued, and after reviewing the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case for a search warrant of the Cochrans' home. The search uncovered a disturbing book by Jason describing murder scenes, one matching Christopher's characteristics. Suspicions about Jason grew, leading to another search, but the home was empty when police arrived. No one opened the door, and it turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried, as they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples. The Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home, and the couple did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder, nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived to find Kelly in a panicked state, obstructing doctors. Jason was discovered dead, his face suggesting extreme overheating. Investigators uncovered a syringe at the home, but the forensic report revealed Jason's death was by strangulation, not drug abuse. This led to a re-examination of the evidence, with Kelly becoming the prime suspect in both her husband's murder and the disappearance of Christopher Reen. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. After learning about the tragic incident from Kelly herself, Walter quickly went to the police. He emphasized that illegal drugs could not have caused Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and Jason would have told him about any changes in his life. Additionally, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs to alleviate the persistent back pain he had been experiencing for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been going through a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his concerns with him, stating that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana due to suspicions from the Iron River Police regarding their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had occurred had significantly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and attempted to take his own life, which necessitated intensive treatment. Walter also observed a noticeable change in his friend's conduct. Kelly started to exert more and more control over his life, and it seemed that Jason was continuously on edge, whereas previously, the boys could spend hours playing video games together. Jason now began to avoid social gatherings as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became a crucial piece in the investigation and enabled the investigators to comprehend the dynamics within the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Reen. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. While Walter accepted a difficult role, he was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea, which came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. Despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her, but she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators, mocking the justice system. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 hectic days filled with unease and upheaval, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to uncover the information that Kelly Cochran was located off the west coast of the United States. She had skillfully evaded the police and traveled to Kentucky, specifically to the town of Wingo, which is situated more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local law enforcement, advising that upon locating Kelly, they should apprehend her, exercising utmost caution due to her potential threat. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house, knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts. They acted quickly and without warning, and that afternoon, Kelly was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he continued interviewing the suspect, along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, the details became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Reen was much more complex and significant than everyone had initially believed. She genuinely loved him, and Kelly longed to escape this city and build a new life with him. However, everything changed on October 13, 2015, when Jason discovered her infidelity. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke, but Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14, 2015, Christopher Reen arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy, as their encounter was while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan, and their evening promised to be special. But their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso, and the remains were placed in several trash bags and then disposed of by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it. The opportunity for a crime came on February 26, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason, it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with the police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill, littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects, one of which was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Reen and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession in court. However, she presented a different version, according to which she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day, caught the lovers off guard, and then grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Reen. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial as a plea agreement was reached, and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where she is serving her sentence. Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her crimes. She claims that she and Jason committed more crimes, and Christopher is just one of their many victims. However, the details, names, and additional crimes that Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in the hope that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.